The gun didn't waver in Bo Callahan's hand as he stared down the woman who'd just thrown herself between him and the outlaws ransacking her home. Blood streaked her temple, her dress was torn, and 5 terrified children huddled behind her skirts. But her eyes blazed with a fury that made hardened men step back. "You want this land?" Kelly Mae Bishop spat. "You'll have to bury me in it first." Bo had come to collect a debt. He hadn't expected to find something worth dying for. Before we dive into this story of frontier justice, unlikely love, and redemption in the wild heart of 1887 Wyoming, I want to invite you to stay with us until the very end, because what happens between this wealthy rancher and defiant widow will surprise you. And please, drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, connecting us across the miles. Now, let's begin. The August sun beat down on Dry Creek Valley like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, turning the Wyoming prairie into a shimmering sea of gold and dust. The year was 1887, and mercy was as scarce as water in a drought year. Bo Callahan knew this better than most. He'd learned it the hard way, through betrayal, through loss, through watching good men die over a handshake that meant nothing when times got hard. That's why Bo didn't believe in second chances anymore. He sat tall in his saddle, a man carved from the same unforgiving stone as the Wind River Mountains behind him. At 34, Bo Callahan was the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, with 10,000 head of cattle bearing his brand and more land than some eastern states. His shadow fell long across Wyoming territory, and when Bo Callahan came calling, even sheriffs made themselves scarce. Today, he rode with 2 purposes: collect the $800 debt owed by the late Samuel Bishop, and foreclose on the 160 acres that would complete his control of the valley's water rights. Business. Cold, clean, necessary business. Behind him rode his foreman, Jack Devereaux, a leathery Texan who'd been with Bo since the trail driving days, and 2 ranch hands, Miller and Crane. Young men hardened by frontier life. They were armed, not for violence, but because a man who traveled unarmed in Wyoming territory was a fool, and Bo Callahan was nobody's fool. "Boss," Jack said, pulling his horse alongside Bo's big roan gelding, "you sure about this? Word in town is the Bishop woman's got 5 young'uns and not a penny to her name. Been 2 months since Sam died." Bo's jaw tightened, but his eyes never left the horizon where a thin column of smoke rose from a weathered homestead. "A debt's a debt, Jack. Sam Bishop borrowed that money knowing full well what he was signing. I didn't write those terms in invisible ink." "I know that. Just saying, you saying I should let $800 walk away because a man was fool enough to die before he paid me back? That's $800 of seed money I loaned him in good faith. Faith he repaid by drinking half of it and planting the other half too late in the season." Bo's voice was flat, emotionless. "Every rancher in this valley is watching what I do here, Jack. I let one debt slide. I'll have a line of sob stories from here to Cheyenne." Jack nodded slowly, but his eyes held doubt. He'd known Bo Callahan for 12 years, and the man he'd met back in '75 had been different. Harder, yes, but with a streak of optimism that frontier life hadn't yet beaten out of him. That man had believed in fresh starts and the basic goodness of people. Then Catherine happened. Catherine Morehouse, the banker's daughter from Laramie, beautiful as a painted sunset and twice as fleeting. Bo had courted her for 2 years, built a ranch house fit for a queen, filled it with furniture shipped from St. Louis and carpets from San Francisco. He'd even bought a piano she'd never learned to play. 3 weeks before their wedding, Bo had ridden home early from a cattle drive to surprise her. The surprise had been on him. He'd found Catherine in his own parlor, in the arms of a traveling whiskey salesman named Thomas Garrett, a man with smooth hands, smooth words, and not a callous or honest dollar to his name. Catherine hadn't apologized. She'd laughed. "Did you really think I'd spend my life on this God-forsaken prairie, Bo? Playing house in the wilderness? Thomas is taking me to San Francisco. We leave tomorrow." They'd left with $15,000 from Bo's safe, money Catherine had learned the combination to during one of those long evenings when Bo had foolishly trusted her with his business. He'd tracked them as far as Denver before the trail went cold. The money was gone. Catherine was gone. And something in Bo Callahan had died that day, turned to ash and blown away across the prairie. After that, Bo stopped believing in goodness. He believed in contracts, in ledgers, in the cold clarity of numbers that didn't lie or betray. He built his empire on iron rules: pay your debts or lose your land. It made him wealthy. It made him powerful. It made him respected and deeply alone. But Bo told himself alone was better. Alone was safer. The Bishop homestead came into view as they crested a low rise. Bo's practiced eye took in the details automatically. House badly in need of paint, roof patched with mismatched boards, fences leaning like drunks after Saturday night. But the fields surprised him. Golden wheat planted late but grown thick and healthy, bent and swayed in the breeze like an inland ocean. A month from harvest, maybe less. "That's decent wheat," Miller observed. "Better than decent." It was. Samuel Bishop might have been a drunk and a fool, but he'd known good land when he'd claimed it. This 160 acres sat on the gentlest slope in the valley, with a spring-fed creek running through it year-round. Perfect farming land, or perfect grazing for the cattle Bo planned to run here once he owned it. As they approached, Bo noticed other details. A kitchen garden, carefully tended, thick with vegetables. Chickens scratching in a well-maintained coop, a milk cow in the barn looking fat and healthy. Clothes hanging on a line, all of them clean but worn thin and carefully patched. The place was poor, but it wasn't neglected. "Somebody's working hard here," Jack muttered. Bo didn't answer. He swung down from his saddle and handed the reins to Miller. "You boys wait here. This won't take long." He walked toward the house, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. The front door stood open to catch the breeze, and through the entrance Bo could see a rough wooden table, mismatched chairs, and walls bare of decoration except for a single faded daguerreotype. "Mrs. Bishop," Bo called out. "It's Bo Callahan. I need a word." For a moment, nothing. Then movement in the doorway, and Bo Callahan, who prided himself on being unsurprised by anything, felt something shift in his chest. The woman who stepped into the sunlight was not what he'd expected. Kelly Mae Bishop couldn't have been more than 26 or 27, though her eyes held the weariness of someone twice that age. She was small, couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds soaking wet, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that hung past her shoulders. Her dress was faded calico, patched at the elbows and hem, and her feet were bare, dusty from the dry earth. But it was her eyes that caught Bo off guard. Hazel green, shot through with gold, they blazed with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step back. This was not the broken, pleading widow he'd imagined. This was a woman who'd looked at hardship and spit in its eye. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice steady despite the way her hands clenched the doorframe. "I've been expecting you." Behind her, Bo caught movement, children peeking around the furniture, 5 pairs of wide eyes and thin, hungry faces. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8, the youngest still in swaddling. Bo removed his hat, old habits of frontier courtesy too ingrained to abandon even now. "Mrs. Bishop, I've come about the matter of your late husband's debt." "Samuel's debt," she corrected, and there was iron in those 2 words. "Not mine." "The debt transfers with the land, ma'am. When your husband borrowed that money, he signed over the deed as collateral. I'm sure you understand." "I understand that my husband was a fool." Kelly's voice cut through his practiced speech like a knife through butter. "I understand that he borrowed money without telling me, drank away half of it at Miller's saloon, and planted the other half so late the wheat barely made it before the first frost. I understand all of that, Mr. Callahan. What I don't understand is why you'd come to collect from a woman with 5 children and a husband barely cold in his grave." "It's been 2 months. 8 weeks and 3 days, Kelly said. "But who's counting?" Bo felt his jaw tighten. This was not going according to plan. He'd expected tears, pleas for mercy, maybe an offer of, well, the kinds of offers desperate widows sometimes made. He hadn't expected defiance. "Mrs. Bishop, I sympathize with your situation." "No, you don't." Kelly stepped down from the porch, moving toward him with surprising speed. She was tiny, barely reaching his shoulder, but she moved like a wildcat. "If you sympathized, you wouldn't be here. If you sympathized, you'd remember that Samuel died trying to save 2 of your calves that broke through the ice on Bitter Creek. Remember that? Because I do. I remember watching my husband ride out in a blizzard to help his neighbor, and I remember them bringing his body back frozen stiff on the back of a wagon. Bo did remember. He'd sent Jack with $50 for the funeral expenses, an anonymous donation, of course. He hadn't attended the service himself. Your husband's heroism doesn't change the facts of the contract, ma'am. The loan was due in full by August 15th. Today is August 20th. I'm already showing considerable patience by... Patience? Kelly's laugh was sharp and bitter. You call 5 days patience? The wheat won't be ready for harvest for another month. 1 month, Mr. Callahan, and I could pay you every penny, with interest. Bo shook his head. He'd heard versions of this story a dozen times before. Next month turned into next season. Next season turned into next year, and debts became bad memories that nobody wanted to honor. I've learned not to believe in next month, Mrs. Bishop. Then you've learned to be a hard man, Kelly said quietly, and something in her voice made Bo look up sharply. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a kind of sad recognition, as if she'd seen this coming all along. The world made me hard, ma'am. I'm just trying to survive in it. We all are, Mr. Callahan. Kelly gestured toward the house, where those 5 small faces still watched. But some of us don't have the luxury of becoming hard. Some of us have to stay soft enough to love the people who depend on us. For just a moment, Bo felt something crack in the careful armor he'd built around his heart. Then he forced it back down, buried it deep where it couldn't touch him. I'll give you 3 days to vacate the property, he said, his voice as cold as January wind. Take whatever personal belongings you can carry. The land, the house, and all fixtures revert to me. I'll see that you get transportation to Laramie, where you might find work. Work? Kelly's voice rose. What kind of work do you imagine a widow with 5 children can find, Mr. Callahan? Should I leave them at the church door like unwanted kittens while I scrub floors at the hotel? Or maybe I should take the job at Miller's Saloon, serving drinks to the same men who egged my husband on while he drank away our future? Bo's hands clenched. That's not my concern. Not your concern. Kelly repeated the words slowly, as if tasting poison. My children starving in the street is not your concern. My eldest daughter, Sarah, who's 8 years old and hasn't had a new dress in 2 years. Not your concern. My son, Thomas, who's 6 and still wakes up crying for his papa. Not your concern. The twins, Mary and Martha, barely 4 years old, who don't even understand why there's never enough food. Not your concern. And baby James, not yet 1-year-old who never even met the father who died saving your property. Not your concern. She said each child's name like a bullet, and Bo felt every one of them hit home. He'd deliberately avoided learning their names, avoided thinking of them as individual souls with faces and futures. It was easier that way. Mrs. Bishop, 7 days. Bo blinked. What? Kelly moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes, close enough to see the set of her jaw and the desperate determination in every line of her face. Give me 7 days, Mr. Callahan. 7 days to bring in the wheat harvest. I've already arranged with Thomas Pritchard at the grain elevator. He'll buy the wheat at market price and pay me in cash. 7 days, and I can pay you $400. That's half the debt. I'll sign a new note for the rest, payable after next year's harvest. You expect me to wait another year? I expect you to show the same mercy the Lord showed you when you were building your empire, Kelly shot back. Or have you forgotten those early years? When you were running cattle on borrowed money, 1 bad winter away from losing everything? Who extended your credit then, Mr. Callahan? Who believed in you when you were just another cowboy with big dreams and empty pockets? Bo's jaw worked. She'd done her research. Yes, there had been lean years, desperate years, when his entire future hung on the faith of a few businessmen who'd taken a chance on a young man with more ambition than sense. That was different, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Was it? Kelly's eyes bored into his. You're a wealthy man now, Mr. Callahan. You have more land and cattle than you know what to do with. This 160 acres, it's everything to me. It's my children's future, their only inheritance from a father who died too young. To you, it's just another property line on a map. It's prime grazing land. It's my home, Kelly said simply, and suddenly her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But she didn't let them fall. Instead, she lifted her chin higher. 7 days is all I'm asking. Is your heart so hard that you can't give a widow 1 week to save her children from poverty? Bo opened his mouth to refuse. The word no formed on his lips. He'd built his entire post-Catherine life on refusing exactly these kinds of emotional appeals, on maintaining the cold distance that protected him from being hurt again. But then, a small voice spoke from the doorway. "Mama? Is the bad man going to take our house?" Bo turned to see a little girl, no more than 6 years old, peeking around the doorframe. She had her mother's hazel eyes and a mass of tangled dark curls. Her dress was too small, showing thin ankles and wrists that looked like they'd snap in a strong wind. She clutched a cornhusk doll missing one arm. Kelly's face transformed, the hard defiance melting into gentle tenderness. "Go inside, Martha. Mama's talking to Mr. Callahan about grown-up things." "But Sarah said the bad man wants our house. She said we'll have to live in the wagon like the Johnsons did before they went away." The child's lower lip trembled. "I don't want to live in a wagon, Mama. It's cold at night." "We're not going to live in a wagon, Sweet Pea. Now go on. Watch baby James for me, will you? You're such a good helper." The child retreated reluctantly, and Kelly turned back to Bo. But something had changed in her face. The defiance was gone, replaced by raw, naked pleading. 7 days, she whispered. "Please. If you have any mercy in you at all, any memory of what it's like to hope for something better, give me 7 days. Bo looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Past the worn dress and bare feet, past the too thin frame and work-roughened hands. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the calluses on her palms from work no woman should have to do alone. The way she held herself, straight-backed, despite the weight of the world on her shoulders. Kelly Mae Bishop was drowning, and she was asking him for a rope. Every instinct, every lesson learned from Catherine's betrayal screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to foreclose, to maintain the hard shell that had kept him safe for 7 long years. But that little girl's face, is the bad man going to take our house? Was he the bad man? 7 days, Bo heard himself say, and he wasn't sure who was more surprised, him or Kelly. You have until August 27th at sundown to bring me $400 cash. If you can do that, I'll extend the loan for the remaining $400 payable by next August at standard interest rates. Kelly's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes going wide. You mean it? You'll really… But, Bo interrupted, his voice harsh. If you miss that deadline by even 1 hour, the full amount comes due immediately, and the land reverts to me. No extensions, no excuses. Is that clear? Clear, Kelly breathed. Crystal clear. And you'll sign a new contract drawn up properly, with witness signatures and filed with the county clerk. I won't be having any disputes about terms later on. I'll sign whatever you need. Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Thank you. Kelly's voice broke on the words, and now those tears did fall, tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. You won't regret this, I promise you. Don't promise me anything, Bo said roughly, jamming his hat back on his head. Just get that wheat harvested. You'll need help. I can manage. No, you can't. Not alone. The wheat's too thick and you've got no hands to hire. Bo ran calculations in his head, old rancher instincts taking over. You'll need at least 3 strong backs to bring it in before the weather turns, and you'll need equipment you don't have. Kelly's face fell. I can't afford to hire help, Mr. Callahan. Every penny I have is going into that wheat harvest. I'll manage somehow. I didn't say hire, Bo interrupted. I'm staying. Both Kelly and Jack, who'd been listening from horseback, stared at him in shock. Boss? Jack ventured carefully. What exactly are you saying? Bo wasn't entirely sure himself. The words had come out of his mouth before his brain could properly vet them. But now that they were spoken, a strange kind of stubborn pride made him commit to them. I'm saying I'm going to camp here for the next 7 days, make sure the work gets done properly. Make sure my investment is protected. He couldn't quite bring himself to call it charity. I'll help with the harvest. That way I can be certain there are no excuses about not making the deadline. You're going to help me harvest wheat? Kelly's voice was incredulous. You, Bo Callahan, are going to do farm work? I've done plenty of farm work in my day,
Bo said defensively. Grew up on a farm in Missouri before I came west. That was 20 years ago. Some things you don't forget. Bo turned to Jack. You and the boys head back to the ranch. Tell Cookie I'll be out here for the week. Send back supplies, bedroll, food, and have him pack the good scythe from the tool shed, the one with the ash handle. Jack's weathered face split in a grin. Boss, this is the damnedest thing I've ever seen you do, and I was there when you rode that bronc on a $50 bet and broke 3 ribs. Just do it, Jack. Sure thing, boss, sure thing. Jack wheeled his horse around, still grinning like a fool. Come on, boys. Let's leave Mr. Callahan to his investment protection. As the 3 riders disappeared over the rise, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the still air, Bo and Kelly stood in awkward silence. The reality of what he'd just committed to was starting to sink in, and Bo felt a flutter of something uncomfortably close to panic. What the hell had he just done? Mr. Callahan, Kelly said softly, and when he looked at her, her eyes were full of something that made his chest ache. Gratitude, hope, and a fragile trust that felt like a physical weight settling on his shoulders. I don't know what changed your mind, but I want you to know you're not a bad man. Whatever you think about yourself, whatever made you so hard, you're not a bad man. Bo wanted to tell her she was wrong. Wanted to explain about Catherine, about all the ways he'd learned that trust was a fool's currency and mercy a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he just nodded once, curtly, and looked away toward the fields of wheat rippling in the breeze. I'll set up camp by the creek, he said. Out of your way. You've got children to feed and work to do. I'll start on the fence repairs tomorrow. They're a hazard as they are. Mr. Callahan, and stop thanking me, Bo added, more harshly than he intended. This is business. Just business. Don't make it into something it's not. But as he walked back to his horse to retrieve his saddlebags, Bo couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped onto a path he didn't understand, one that led somewhere far from the safe, cold world he'd built for himself. 7 days, he told himself firmly. 7 days. And then he'd ride back to his big empty house and his ledgers and his carefully ordered life. 7 days. What could possibly change in 7 days? That first evening, Bo made camp by the creek as promised, about 50 yards from the main house, close enough to be available if needed, far enough to maintain proper distance. He unsaddled his horse, picketed it on good grass, and laid out his bedroll under the spreading branches of an ancient cottonwood tree. The creek burbled softly over smooth stones, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. Bo was used to the noise of the bunkhouse, the constant activity of ranch life, the distraction of 100 daily tasks that kept his mind occupied. Out here, with nothing but the creek and the wind for company, unwelcome thoughts crept in. As twilight deepened into night, Bo watched the lamplight flicker in the windows of the Bishop house. Shadows moved behind the thin curtains. Kelly, he assumed, putting her children to bed. He could hear faint voices carried on the evening breeze, though he couldn't make out words. A child's laugh, Kelly's voice, soft and melodic, probably singing a lullaby. Bo closed his eyes and tried not to think about the empty rooms in his own house, the nursery he'd had built that had never held a child, the dreams he'd abandoned after Catherine's betrayal. He told himself he didn't want those things anymore, told himself he was better off alone, independent, untouchable. But listening to those distant sounds of family life, Bo wondered if he'd been lying to himself all along. He must have dozed off, because he woke to the sound of footsteps approaching his camp. His hand went instinctively to the Colt, 45 at his hip, before he recognized the small figure moving through the darkness. Kelly. She carried something wrapped in cloth, and even from a distance he could smell fresh bread. Didn't mean to startle you, she said quietly, stopping at what she clearly considered a respectful distance. I thought you might be hungry. It's not much, just cornbread and some beans, but you're welcome to it. Bo sat up, automatically reaching for his hat even though he was already wearing it. Frontier manners died hard. You didn't need to do that, Mrs. Bishop. I've got provisions coming from the ranch. Not until tomorrow, I'd wager, and a man shouldn't go to bed hungry if there's food to be shared. She held out the bundle. Please, it's the least I can do. Bo accepted the offering because refusing would have been churlish.
When Kelly made no move to leave, he gestured awkwardly to a flat rock near his fire ring. You can sit if you want, though I imagine you've got plenty to do. Children are asleep, first quiet I've had all day. Kelly settled onto the rock with a sigh that spoke of bone-deep weariness. Thought maybe we should talk about the work ahead. Make a plan. Sensible. Bo unwrapped the cornbread, still warm, and broke off a piece. It was dense and filling, made without eggs or milk to save those precious commodities for the children. The wheat looks ready, another week at most. We'll need to cut it, shock it, let it dry for a few days, then thresh it. I know the process, Kelly said with a hint of her earlier defiance. I grew up on a farm in Missouri myself, southern Missouri, near the Arkansas border. I'm from Missouri too, Bo said, surprised. Northern part, near the Iowa line. Small world, Kelly smiled faintly. Did you fight? Bo knew what she was asking. The war between the states had split Missouri down the middle, turned neighbor against neighbor, father against son. I was too young. War ended when I was 12, but my father fought for the Union, lost an arm at Pea Ridge, He paused. You? My father fought for the Confederacy, died at Wilson's Creek. Kelly's voice was matter-of-fact, but Bo heard the old pain beneath it. I was 7. Don't remember much about him except he had a big laugh and he used to carry me on his shoulders. Hard thing, losing a father young. Hard thing losing anyone young, Kelly countered, but it teaches you what matters. Family, loyalty, taking care of your own. She looked at him directly. That's why I fight so hard for this land, Mr. Callahan. It's not about the money or even the property itself. It's about giving my children stability, a place to call home, something I never really had after my father died. Bo chewed his cornbread slowly, considering her words. What brought you to Wyoming? Samuel. Kelly's expression softened and saddened simultaneously. We met in St. Louis. I was working as a seamstress, and he was, well, he had dreams. Big dreams about the West, about homesteading, about building something from nothing. She laughed quietly, without humor. Samuel was always dreaming. Unfortunately, he wasn't as good at the doing part. He was a drunk, Bo said flatly. He was a man who couldn't live up to his own expectations, Kelly corrected gently. There's a difference. Samuel wanted to be a good husband, a good father. He wanted to be strong and successful and provide for his family. When he couldn't do those things, when the crops failed or the money ran out or things got hard, he drank to forget how much he was disappointing us. That's a generous way to see it. Maybe, but holding on to anger against a dead man seems like a waste of energy I need for other things. Kelly stood, brushing dust from her worn skirt. I should get back. Just wanted to say thank you again, and to let you know I'll be up before dawn to start on the field work. If you're serious about helping, I could use strong arms for the scything. I'll be there. Mr. Callahan? Kelly paused, her face half in shadow. Why did you really change your mind? Back there, when you agreed to give me 7 days, what made you do it? Bo was quiet for a long moment, staring into the darkness. Finally he said, Your daughter, the little one. Martha, you said her name was? Yes, Martha Rose. She's my middle child, sweet as honey, and twice as sticky. She asked if I was the bad man. Bo's voice was rough. I didn't like the answer I saw in my own head. Kelly was silent for so long that Bo thought she'd left. Then her voice came soft through the darkness. Good night, Mr. Callahan, and thank you for being the kind of man who can hear that question and care about the answer. Then she was gone, moving silently back toward the house, and Bo was left alone with the stars and the creek and thoughts that wouldn't leave him in peace. He lay back on his bedroll and stared up at the endless Wyoming sky, at constellations he'd known since childhood, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion rising in the east. His father had taught him those stars on cold Missouri nights, back before the war, back when the world had seemed simpler. The stars are God's promise, his father used to say. No matter how dark things get, they're always there, shining steady. Remember that, Bo. When life gets hard, and it will get hard, look up at those stars and remember there's something bigger than your troubles, something constant and true. Bo had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way, forgotten about constants and truth, forgotten about anything except protecting himself from being hurt again. But lying here in Kelly Mae Bishop's wheat field, with the taste of her cornbread still in his mouth and her daughter's question echoing in his mind, Bo wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been protecting himself right into a prison of his own making. 7 days, he reminded himself again. 7 days, and then things would go back to normal. But deep in his heart, Bo suspected that nothing would ever be quite normal again. As he drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was of hazel eyes flecked with gold, blazing with a fire that no hardship could extinguish. And for the first time in 7 years, Bo Callahan felt something stir in his chest that he'd thought Catherine had killed forever. Hope. Dawn came to Dry Creek Valley the way it always did, slowly at first, painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and amber, then all at once, as if someone had thrown open a curtain on the world. Bo woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood, a rhythmic thunk, 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 that pulled him from dreams he couldn't quite remember, but that left him with an odd sense of yearning. He sat up, muscles protesting slightly. Sleeping on the ground wasn't as easy as it had been 20 years ago. Through the morning mist rising from the creek, Bo could make out a figure working by the woodpile behind the house. Kelly, her dark braid swinging as she brought the axe down again and again, splitting firewood with practiced efficiency. Bo checked his pocket watch. 5:15. The woman had been up for at least an hour, maybe more, judging by the neat stack of split wood already accumulated. He rolled up his bedroll, splashed cold creek water on his face, and walked toward the house, his boots crunching on the frost-touched grass. Kelly didn't hear him approach over the sound of her own labor. Bo watched for a moment as she set another log on the chopping block, raised the axe, too high, wrong angle, he noted automatically, and brought it down. The blade bit into the wood but didn't split it clean through. She had to wiggle it free and strike again. "You're going to hurt yourself swinging like that," Bo said. Kelly spun around, axe still in hand, and for a moment they faced each other across the woodpile. The wealthy rancher and the desperate widow, both up before sunrise, both too stubborn to admit they were in over their heads. Then Kelly lowered the axe and wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Callahan. Coffee's on the stove if you want some." "Show me how you're holding that axe," Bo said instead. Kelly's jaw set in that stubborn line he was beginning to recognize. "I've been chopping wood for 8 years, Mr. Callahan. I think I know." "Show me." For a moment he thought she'd refuse. Then, with a barely suppressed sigh, Kelly positioned another log and demonstrated her grip and swing. Bo winced. "You're holding it too tight and swinging from the shoulders instead of using your whole body. That's why you're wearing yourself out and not getting clean splits." He held out his hand. "May I?" Kelly hesitated, then handed him the axe. Bo positioned himself, adjusted his grip, and demonstrated the proper technique. Loose hands, using the weight of the axe and the motion of his body to generate force rather than pure muscle strength. The log split cleanly with a satisfying crack. "You let the axe do the work," he explained, setting up another log. "Like this. See how I'm barely gripping it until the moment of impact? That's the secret. Tight grip wastes energy and throws off your aim." He split 3 more logs in quick succession, then handed the axe back to Kelly. "Your turn." Kelly took the axe, mimicking his grip and stance. Her first swing was tentative, but the log split more cleanly than before. Her face lit up with surprised pleasure. "That's much easier. Why didn't Samuel ever show me that?" "Maybe he didn't know. Not every man who swings an axe knows how to swing it right." Bo stepped back. "Keep practicing. I'm going to walk the wheat field, check how close it is to harvest." He started to turn away, then Kelly's voice stopped him. "Mr. Callahan, thank you. For the lesson, I mean." Bo nodded without looking back, uncomfortable with her gratitude. He wasn't here to make friends or earn thanks. He was here to protect his investment, nothing more. He kept telling himself that as he walked through the wheat field, running his hands over the golden stalks, checking the kernels for hardness, judging moisture content by feel and sight the way his father had taught him 40 years ago in Missouri. The wheat was close. 3 days, maybe 4 at most, before it would be at optimal harvest. Any longer, and they risked losing it to weather or birds or any of the 100 calamities that could befall a crop. But 3 days was enough time if they worked efficiently. Bo was doing mental calculations. How many man-hours of scything, how long to shock and dry the wheat, the logistics of getting it to the grain elevator in town, when a small voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you really going to help Mama?" Bo turned to find a boy standing at the edge of the field, barefoot, and wearing pants that had been patched so many times they were more patched than original fabric. This must be Thomas, the 6-year-old Kelly had mentioned. He had his mother's hazel eyes and a shock of dark hair that stuck up in the back like a rooster's tail. "That's the plan," Bo said carefully. He'd never been comfortable around children. They asked too many questions and had an unnerving way of seeing through adult pretenses. "Papa used to say you were the richest man in Wyoming." Thomas squatted down and picked up a clod of dirt, examining it with the intense focus children brought to everything. "Are you really?" "One of them, I suppose." "Then why do you want our land? Don't you have enough land already?" Out of the mouths of babes, Bo thought wryly. "It's complicated." That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to explain something. Thomas threw the dirt clod, watching it explode into dust. "Mama cried last night after she thought we were asleep. I heard her. She only cries when things are really bad." Bo felt something twist in his chest. "Your mama's strong. She'll be fine." "I know she's strong. But even strong people get tired." Thomas looked up at Bo with those disconcerting hazel eyes. "Papa used to get tired. That's why he drank the bad water that made him act funny. Mama explained it to me. She said sometimes people get so tired of being strong that they need help being strong, but they don't know how to ask for it." The kid was 6 years old and already possessed more emotional intelligence than Bo had managed to acquire in 34 years. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is. She knows everything." Thomas stood up and brushed dirt from his pants. "Are you going to marry my mama?" Bo nearly choked. "What? No, I'm just here to... Why would you ask that?" "Billy Hutchins said that when his papa died, a man came and married his mama after only 2 months. He said that's what happens when papas die. New papas come to replace them." Thomas's face was serious, considering. "I don't think I want a new papa, but Sarah says we might need one anyway, because Mama can't do everything by herself, even though she tries." Bo crouched down to the boy's level, suddenly feeling the weight of this strange conversation. "Listen to me, Thomas. I'm not here to replace your father or marry your mother. I'm here because your father owed me money, and your mother and I made an agreement about how to settle that debt. That's all. Understand?" "I guess so." Thomas didn't look entirely convinced. "But if you were going to marry Mama, I'd want you to know that she likes wildflowers, especially Indian paintbrush, and she gets scared during thunderstorms, but pretend she doesn't because she doesn't want us to be scared. And she sings when she thinks nobody's listening, and she's really good at it even though she says she's not." "Thomas!" Kelly's voice cut across the field. "Leave Mr. Callahan alone and come help your sisters with the chickens." "Yes, Mama." Thomas scampered off, leaving Bo crouched in the wheat field, mind reeling from one of the strangest conversations he'd ever had. She likes wildflowers. She's scared of thunderstorms. She sings when she thinks nobody's listening. Bo shook his head firmly. He didn't need to know these things, didn't want to know them. Knowing them made Kelly Bishop into a person with depth and complexity rather than just a name in a ledger. He stood up, brushed off his pants, and headed back toward the house. Jack and the boys would be arriving soon with supplies, and they had work to do. Real work. Physical work that would keep his mind occupied and away from dangerous territory like wildflowers and singing widows. But as he walked through the golden wheat, Bo couldn't quite shake the image Thomas had painted. Kelly crying silently in the dark after her children were asleep, bearing her burdens alone because she had to be strong for everyone else. Bo knew something about that kind of loneliness. He'd been living it for 7 years. By mid-morning, Jack had arrived with supplies, bedroll, provisions, tools, and the good scythe Bo had requested. The foreman took one look at Bo's face and wisely kept his observations to himself, though his eyes gleamed with suppressed amusement. "Anything else you need, boss?" Jack asked, unloading a sack of coffee beans. "No, head back to the ranch. Check on the north pasture. Those heifers should be ready to move to fresh grass." Bo paused. "And Jack? Not a word about this to anyone. Understand? About you playing farmer for a week? Wouldn't dream of mentioning it, boss. Jack's grin belied his words. Though I expect Cookie's going to have questions when I tell him where you are. Tell Cookie to mind his own business. Sure thing. Jack mounted his horse, then looked back with unusual seriousness. Boss? For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing here. Before Bo could respond, Jack had spurred his horse into a trot, leaving Bo alone with his uncomfortable thoughts and a sigh that suddenly seemed to weigh more than it should. The rest of that first day established a pattern that would hold for the next several days. Bo worked on fence repairs while Kelly continued her endless round of chores, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, caring for the children, managing the animals. They moved around each other like cautious dancers, polite but distant, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. But small things kept happening that eroded that careful distance. On the second morning, Bo found a plate of biscuits waiting by his campsite, still warm from the oven. That afternoon, when he hammered his thumb while fixing a fence post, Kelly appeared with a tin of salve and clean bandages, her touch gentle and efficient as she wrapped his injury. You should be more careful, she said. I'm out of practice, Bo admitted, flexing his thumb. Been a while since I did this kind of work myself. The privilege of wealth, Kelly observed, but there was no bitterness in her tone, just a statement of fact. The isolation of wealth, Bo corrected without thinking. Then, realizing what he'd revealed, he stood abruptly. Thank you for the bandage. Kelly stood too, studying his face with those two perceptive eyes. You're lonely. I'm fine. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. Kelly gathered up her supplies. You can be fine and still be lonely, Mr. Callahan. In fact, I think sometimes being fine is just another word for being alone without complaining about it. She walked away before Bo could formulate a response, leaving him standing by the fence with a bandaged thumb and a chest that felt oddly tight. That evening, as Bo sat by his campfire eating beans straight from the can, he heard singing drifting from the house. Kelly's voice, clear and sweet, carrying the melody of an old hymn. Come thou fount of every blessing. Bo found himself frozen, spoon halfway to his mouth, listening. Thomas had been right. She was really good at it. On the third morning, Bo woke to find small footprints in the damp earth near his campsite and a handful of wildflowers laid carefully on a flat rock near his bedroll. Indian paintbrush, their red-orange blooms bright against the gray stone. Bo stared at those flowers for a long moment, throat tight. Then he carefully picked them up and tucked them into his shirt pocket before anyone could see. It was also the third morning that brought the first real test of their fragile truce. Bo was sharpening the scythe when he heard Kelly cry out in alarm. He dropped everything and ran toward the sound, hand going automatically to his gun, expecting danger, outlaws, wild animals, any of the 100 threats that plagued frontier life. Instead, he found Kelly frozen in place near the chicken coop, her face pale with terror. On the ground, not 5 feet from where her youngest daughter, Martha, with her corn-husk doll, played in the dirt, was a prairie rattlesnake coiled and buzzing its warning. Time seemed to slow down. Bo saw it all with crystalline clarity. The snake, its rattles vibrating in agitation. Martha reaching toward it with the innocent curiosity of a child who didn't know danger when she saw it. Kelly unable to move forward or call out for fear of triggering the strike. Bo didn't think. He drew and fired in one smooth motion, a skill honed by years on the frontier where the difference between fast and dead was measured in heartbeats. The bullet took the snake's head off cleanly, the body writhing reflexively even as the danger ended. The gunshot shattered the morning quiet. Martha screamed and burst into tears. Kelly rushed forward, scooped up her daughter, and held her tight, shaking visibly. Shh, sweet pea, it's okay. Mama's got you, Kelly murmured over and over, her voice unsteady. You're safe. You're safe. The other children came running, Sarah, Thomas, the other twin Mary, all talking at once, wanting to see the snake, asking if Martha was hurt, creating chaos the way frightened children do. Everyone inside, Bo said firmly, his own heart still hammering from the adrenaline rush. Now, your mother needs a moment. To his surprise, they obeyed, Sarah shepherding the younger ones toward the house with a maturity beyond her 8 years. Bo holstered his gun and approached Kelly slowly, the way he might approach a spooked horse. Mrs. Bishop? Kelly?
Kelly looked up at him, and the raw fear in her eyes hit Bo like a physical blow. "I couldn't move," she whispered. "I saw the snake. I saw Martha reaching for it, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed." What kind of mother freezes when her child is in danger? The kind who's smart enough not to spook a rattler into striking, Bo said firmly. You did exactly right. If you'd rushed forward or yelled, that snake would have bitten her for sure. But I didn't do anything. You saved her. Kelly's voice broke, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and painful. I can't do this. I can't keep them safe. I can't harvest the wheat alone. I can't fix the fences. I can't protect them from snakes or hunger or... I can't do this, Bo. I can't. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and hearing it broke something loose in Bo's carefully constructed walls. Without thinking, he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest while he stood there awkwardly, one hand hovering uncertainly before finally settling on her back in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. You can do this, he said quietly. You're doing this. Every day you're doing the impossible, Kelly. You're raising 5 children alone, keeping a farm running, holding everything together through sheer force of will. The fact that you can't do everything perfectly doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Kelly cried harder, her fingers clutching his shirt like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a churning sea. Bo held her, uncomfortable and uncertain, but unwilling to let go, while the morning sun climbed higher and the chickens clucked obliviously in their coop. When Kelly finally pulled away, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, and she looked mortally embarrassed. I'm sorry, I don't usually... I try not to. Don't apologize, Bo said gruffly. He pulled out his bandana and offered it to her. You're entitled to a moment of fear. God knows you've earned it. Kelly took the bandana and wiped her face. Your shirt is all wet. It'll dry. They stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Kelly took a shaky breath and straightened her shoulders, and Bo watched in real time as she rebuilt the walls she'd let down, brick by brick, until she was once again the strong, defiant widow who faced the world without flinching. I should deal with that snake, Kelly said. The meat's good eating if you know how to prepare it. I'll do it, Bo offered. You check on your daughter. Mr. Callahan, Bo... Kelly met his eyes directly. Thank you for being here, for... She gestured helplessly, encompassing the dead snake, the fence repairs, the reprieve on the debt, maybe even the awkward comfort of a few moments ago. For all of it. Bo nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He watched her walk back to the house, her spine straight despite the tremor he could still see in her hands, and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This wasn't about the debt anymore. Maybe it never had been. That afternoon, while Kelly was occupied with the children, Bo walked to the creek with a shovel. He dug carefully, looking for the right spot, and found what he was seeking, a patch of wild roses growing along the bank, their pink blooms bright against the green. He dug up 3 of the bushes, careful to keep the root balls intact, and replanted them in the bare dirt near Kelly's front porch, where she'd see them every morning when she came out. It was a small thing, probably a stupid thing. Bo had never been good at gestures like this. Catherine had always complained that he was too practical, too focused on the tangible and immediate to understand romance. But Kelly wasn't Catherine. Kelly was a woman who split her own firewood and faced down rattlesnakes and raised 5 children on determination and stubborn hope. Kelly didn't need grand gestures or expensive gifts. She needed someone to see her, to acknowledge the weight she carried, to remind her that she wasn't completely alone. Bo hoped Wild Roses would say what he couldn't find words for. He was covering the last transplant with soil when a shadow fell across him. Bo looked up to find Thomas standing there, watching with those 2 wise eyes. Those are for Mama, aren't you? The boy asked. They're just bushes. Needed something to fill this empty spot. Thomas smiled, a knowing expression that looked strange on such a young face. Mama's going to like them. She always stops to smell the flowers when we walk by the creek. Yeah, well, don't make a big deal about it. I won't. Thomas paused. Mr. Callahan? I'm glad you shot that snake. I was scared it was going to bite Martha. That's what men do, Bo said, still focused on packing soil around the rose bushes.
We protect the people who can't protect themselves. Is that why you're helping us? Because we can't protect ourselves? Bo sat back on his heels, considering the question. I'm helping because it's the right thing to do. Papa used to say that the right thing and the easy thing are hardly ever the same thing. Your father was correct about that, at least. Did you know my papa? Thomas asked suddenly, before he died? Not well. He came to me for a loan, and I gave it to him. That was the extent of our acquaintance. Was he? Thomas hesitated, and Bo realized the boy was building up to something difficult. Was he a bad man? Bo looked at Thomas carefully, seeing the real question beneath the words. This boy had heard things, had probably heard his father called a drunk, a fool, a failure. He was asking if those labels made his father someone not worth remembering, not worth loving. Your father made some poor choices, Bo said slowly, choosing his words carefully. But poor choices don't make a man bad. They make him human. And from what I understand, your father died trying to save my cattle in a blizzard. That was the act of a brave man, Thomas. Whatever else he was brave when it counted. Thomas's eyes brightened with unshed tears. Thank you for saying that. It's the truth. The boy nodded, then ran off to join his sisters, leaving Bo alone with the transplanted roses and a strange ache in his chest. He finished packing the soil, gave the bushes a good watering from the creek, and stepped back to survey his work. They looked pitiful, honestly. 3 scraggly rose bushes in bare dirt. Probably half of them wouldn't survive the transplant shock. But they were alive, and they would bloom, and maybe that was enough. That evening brought a summer thunderstorm, the kind that rolled across the plains like divine artillery, all flash and crash and torrential rain. Bo retreated to the sheltered overhang of the barn, watching the lightning paint the sky in shades of white and purple, counting the seconds between flash and thunder to judge the storm's distance. A crash of thunder louder than the others made Bo flinch despite himself. In the following silence, he heard something else, a child crying. He looked toward the house and saw a lamp lit in one window, shadows moving behind the thin curtains. Bo told himself it was none of his business. The children were scared of the storm, and Kelly was handling it. He should stay here, stay out of the way, maintain the distance he'd carefully constructed. But Thomas's words echoed in his mind. She gets scared during thunderstorms, but pretends she doesn't, because she doesn't want us to be scared. Before he could talk himself out of it, Bo was jogging through the rain toward the house. He knocked once, then let himself in, not waiting for an invitation because waiting seemed foolish when he was already soaked through. The scene inside stopped him in his tracks. All 5 children were gathered around Kelly on the floor, the youngest, baby James, crying in her arms while the others clung to her skirts. Kelly herself was pale, her lips moving in what looked like silent prayer, or perhaps just counting between thunderclaps, but she was singing, voice slightly unsteady but determined, a children's song about sunshine and rainbows. She looked up when Bo entered, surprise and something else. Relief? Embarrassment? Flashing across her face. Mr. Callahan, I didn't realize you were... The children are just a bit frightened of the storm. Another crash of thunder, close enough to rattle the windows. Kelly flinched involuntarily, and Bo saw her hold the children tighter. Storms are scary, Bo said matter-of-factly, addressing the children rather than Kelly. Nothing wrong with being scared of something that can hurt you. That's just good sense. Papa said brave people aren't scared of anything, Sarah, the eldest, said quietly. Your papa was wrong about that, Bo replied, and saw Kelly's eyes widen slightly. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway. Your mother is one of the bravest people I know, and I guarantee you she's scared of storms. Is that true, Mama? Martha asked. Are you scared? Kelly hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, Sweet Pea. I'm scared of storms. They're loud and unpredictable, and I don't like not being able to control them. But you always tell us everything's going to be okay, Thomas said, sounding confused. Because it will be. Being scared doesn't change that. Kelly met Bo's eyes, and he saw gratitude there, and something else he couldn't quite name. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're frightened and keep going anyway. Bo found himself moving closer, drawn by something he didn't fully understand. He settled onto the floor, awkwardly, his long legs folding uncomfortably, and found himself surrounded by children. Martha immediately climbed into his lap without asking permission, her corn-husk doll clutched in one small fist. "Tell us a story, Mr. Callahan," she demanded. "A story about storms." Bo looked helplessly at Kelly, who smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "Yes, Mr. Callahan," Kelly said, her eyes dancing despite the fear still visible in their depths. "Tell us a story about storms." So Bo, who hadn't told a story in more years than he could count, found himself talking about a cattle drive he'd been on in '76, when a thunderstorm had spooked the herd and caused a stampede. He told them about the chaos and the danger, but also about how the cowboys had worked together to turn the herd, about the camaraderie and the triumph when they'd finally gotten the cattle under control. He found himself embellishing details, adding dramatic pauses, doing different voices for different characters, things he'd never done before, didn't even know he could do. The children listened with rapt attention, even baby James growing quiet and drowsy in Kelly's arms. By the time Bo finished the story, the storm had passed, rumbling away toward the eastern horizon. The children's fear had been replaced by heavy-lidded sleepiness. "All right, little ones," Kelly said softly. "Time for bed. Thank Mr. Callahan for the story." A chorus of sleepy thank yous filled the room as Kelly shepherded the children toward their beds. All in one room, Bo noticed, probably so they could share body heat during the cold Wyoming winters. Sarah, the oldest, helped with the younger ones, showing that same startling maturity he'd noticed before. Bo stood awkwardly, suddenly aware that he was dripping water all over Kelly's floor, that he'd inserted himself into her family's private moment without real invitation. "I should go. I'm making a mess." "Stay," Kelly said quietly. She'd settled baby James in a cradle near the far wall and was returning to the main room. "Please, just for a few minutes. The rain's still falling, and I'd like to thank you properly." "You don't need to thank me for anything." "I do, though." Kelly moved to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot that always seemed to be brewing. She handed one to Bo, and their fingers brushed briefly, a point of warmth in the cool evening air. "You didn't have to come check on us during the storm. You didn't have to tell the children that story, or admit that brave people can be scared too. You didn't have to transplant those rose bushes by the porch. You saw those." "Of course I saw them. I see everything that happens around here. I have to." Kelly settled into one of the mismatched chairs at the table, gesturing for Bo to take another. "They're beautiful. They'll be even more beautiful next spring when they bloom." "If they survive the transplant," Bo cautioned, sitting carefully. The chair creaked under his weight. "It's late in the season for moving plants." "They'll survive," Kelly said with certainty. "Things that are meant to bloom find a way, no matter how late they're planted or how poor the soil." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee, listening to the soft sounds of rain on the roof and children settling into sleep. It was peaceful in a way Bo hadn't experienced in years, domestic, comfortable, real. "Can I ask you something, Bo?" Kelly's use of his first name had become more natural over the past few days. "Something personal?" Bo tensed slightly. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer." "Why are you really here? And don't tell me it's just about protecting your investment. You could have sent Jack or one of your other hands to supervise the harvest. You didn't need to stay yourself." Bo stared into his coffee, watching steam rise in lazy spirals. For a long moment, he considered giving her some version of the lie he'd been telling himself, about business, about debts, about practical concerns. Instead, he found himself saying, "Because your daughter asked if I was the bad man, and I didn't want to be." Kelly was quiet, waiting. 7 years ago, Bo continued, the words coming slowly, painfully, like pulling an arrow from a wound, "I was engaged to be married. Catherine Morehouse. Banker's daughter. Beautiful, refined, everything a man could want, or so I thought. What happened? She betrayed me, left me for another man 3 weeks before our wedding, after cleaning out $15,000 from my safe, money she had access to because I was fool enough to trust her." Bo's hands tightened around the coffee cup. "That's when I learned that trust is a luxury I couldn't afford, that mercy gets you nothing but an empty safe and an empty house." So you decided to become hard, Kelly said softly, to protect yourself from being hurt again. It worked. For 7 years, it worked perfectly. I built an empire, made myself wealthy beyond what I'd ever dreamed, and I did it by following one simple rule. Business is business, sentiment is weakness, and debts must be paid. And then you rode out here to collect on mine. And then I rode out here to collect on yours, Bo agreed, and found a barefoot widow with 5 children and eyes that wouldn't quit, trying to harvest wheat by herself because she refused to give up. Found children who needed things I couldn't give them but recognized anyway. He stopped, unable to finish. Found what? Kelly prompted gently. Bo looked up and met her eyes directly. Found something that made me question whether I'd been protecting myself all these years or just building a very comfortable prison. Kelly reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her palm was rough with calluses, her fingers work-worn and strong, and Bo found himself turning his hand over to clasp hers properly. Thank you, Kelly said, for telling me, for trusting me with that. Don't thank me yet. I'm still the man who came to take your land. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? Kelly squeezed his hand gently. Because the man who came to take my land wouldn't have given me 7 days. He wouldn't have transplanted roses, or fixed my fences, or told my children stories during a thunderstorm. That man died somewhere between arriving here and now. You just haven't admitted it yet. Bo pulled his hand back, suddenly frightened by how much he wanted to believe her. The debt's still due in 4 days. That hasn't changed either. I know, and I'll pay it. Kelly stood, gathering the coffee cups. I will pay it, Bo. I promise you that. I believe you. And surprisingly, he did. Bo stood to leave, but Kelly's voice stopped him at the door. Bo, one more thing. He turned back. When this is over, when the debt is paid and you ride back to your ranch, I want you to remember something. You're not the bad man. You never were. You're just a man who got hurt and learned the wrong lessons from it. But it's not too late to learn different ones. Bo didn't trust himself to respond. He just nodded once and stepped out into the soft rain, walking back to his camp with Kelly's words echoing in his mind and the ghost of her touch still warming his hand. That night, lying in his bedroll and listening to the creek murmur its ancient song, Bo admitted something to himself that he'd been denying for days. He was falling for Kelly Mae Bishop. Not the practical surface-level attraction he'd felt for Catherine, but something deeper and more dangerous. A connection that reached past his carefully constructed defenses and touched something he'd thought Catherine had killed forever. It terrified him, because in 4 days he'd ride away from here and back to his empty house and his ledgers and his safe, solitary life. Kelly would have her land, he'd have his money, and this strange week would become nothing more than a memory, a detour from the path he'd chosen 7 years ago. But as Bo drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought wasn't of ledgers or debts or protecting himself from pain. It was of hazel eyes and work-worn hands and a voice singing in the darkness, brave despite the fear, refusing to surrender to the storm. And Bo realized that Kelly Mae Bishop had accomplished what he'd thought was impossible. She'd made him want something more than safety. She'd made him want to be brave enough to hope again. The fourth morning dawned clear and golden, the kind of perfect late summer day that made a man believe in providence. Bo woke with purpose coursing through his veins. Today they would begin the harvest. The wheat had reached optimal ripeness overnight, the kernels hard and dry, ready to be cut before the weather could turn or birds could devastate the crop. He was sharpening the scythe when Kelly emerged from the house, already dressed for hard labor in an old pair of what must have been Samuel's trousers, cinched tight at the waist with rope, and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hair was braided and pinned close to her head, and she carried 2 canteens of water. "Ready?" she asked, handing him one of the canteens. "Ready," Bo confirmed. He hefted the scythe, testing its weight and balance. "I'll start at the north end, work my way south in rows. You follow behind, gather the stalks into bundles, lay them out to dry. Sarah can help you, she's old enough for light work. Sarah's watching the younger ones today. I can manage the bundling myself." Bo looked at the vast field of wheat, easily 4 acres, and shook his head. "That's too much for one person, Kelly. You'll wear yourself out before we're halfway through." "Then I'll be worn out. Won't be the first time." Kelly's jaw set in that stubborn line. My children come first. I'm not putting Sarah to work like a field hand when she should be watching her siblings. They stood facing each other in the early morning light, two equally stubborn people locked in a battle of wills. Finally, Bo sighed. Fine, but we work in shifts, 20 minutes cutting, 5 minutes rest, no arguments. No arguments, Kelly agreed, though her tone suggested she'd work right through the rest periods if he wasn't watching. They started at the north edge of the field as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning mist. Bo fell into the rhythm his father had taught him 40 years ago. Swing, step, the scythe blade singing through the wheat stalks with a sound like whispered secrets. Behind him, he could hear Kelly gathering the fallen wheat, her breathing steady despite the intensity of the labor. The work was hard, harder than Bo remembered. His muscles, accustomed to riding and occasional ranch work but not sustained manual labor, began to protest after the first hour. Blisters formed on his palms where the scythe handle rubbed. Sweat soaked through his shirt and ran into his eyes. But he kept going, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe? Or the need to prove he was still the man he'd been before wealth had softened him. Or maybe it was the knowledge that Kelly was watching, and he'd be damned if he'd show weakness in front of a woman half his size who'd been doing this kind of work for years. By midday, they'd cut nearly half an acre. Bo called a halt for lunch, and Kelly didn't argue this time. She simply collapsed in the shade of the cottonwood tree by the creek, breathing hard, her face flushed with exertion. Here, Bo said, offering her his canteen. Drink. You're going to make yourself sick working in this heat. Kelly drank deeply, water spilling down her chin and throat. When she lowered the canteen, she was smiling despite her obvious exhaustion. We're making good progress. At this rate, we'll have the whole field cut by tomorrow evening. If we don't kill ourselves first, Bo muttered, examining the blisters on his hands. Let me see those. Kelly took his hands before he could protest, turning them over to examine the raw, bleeding patches. You need these wrapped, or they'll get infected. Come on. She led him back to the house, where she produced clean cloth and more of that salve she seemed to have an endless supply of. Her touch was gentle as she cleaned and bandaged his hands, her fingers cool against his overheated skin. You don't have to do this, you know, Kelly said quietly, focused on her task. The harvest, I mean. You've already done more than anyone could reasonably expect. I'm sure I could hire help in town. With what money? Bo interrupted. You said yourself every penny is going toward paying the debt. I'd figure something out. I always do. Kelly. Bo waited until she looked up at him. I'm staying. Stop trying to convince me to leave. I just don't want you to feel obligated. I don't feel obligated. I feel... Bo trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. How did he feel? Responsible? Protective? Something deeper and more dangerous that he didn't want to examine too closely? I feel like I should be here. So I'm here. That's all. Kelly held his gaze for a long moment, and Bo saw something shift in her eyes. Understanding, maybe, or acceptance of something unspoken between them. Then she finished tying off the bandage and stepped back. All right then, you're here. We should eat something before we go back out. I made sandwiches this morning. They ate in companionable silence, sitting on the porch steps while the children played in the yard. Thomas was teaching the twins some kind of game involving throwing stones into a bucket, while Sarah held baby James and sang to him. It was such a normal domestic scene that Bo felt something ache in his chest, a longing for something he'd convinced himself he didn't want. They're good kids, Bo observed. They are, Kelly agreed, pride evident in her voice. They've had to grow up too fast, but they're good kids. Sarah especially. She's been like a little mother to the others since Samuel died. Sometimes I worry she's missing her childhood. She seems happy enough. For now. But what happens when she's 16, 17, when boys start coming around and she realizes what she's been missing? Kelly's voice was troubled. I want better for her, Bo. I want better for all of them. That's why I'm fighting so hard for this land. It's not just about having a roof over our heads. It's about having something solid beneath our feet, something they can build on. Before Bo could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the afternoon quiet. Both he and Kelly stood, hands instinctively going to defensive positions.
Kelly reaching for the rifle she kept by the door, Bo's hand settling on his Colt. 3 riders crested the rise, and Bo recognized them immediately. Frank Miller and 2 of his cronies from the saloon in town. Miller was a bully and a drunk, the kind of man who felt powerful only when he was tearing others down. Bo had thrown him off the Callahan ranch 2 years ago for mistreating horses, and hadn't missed him since.
Well, well, Miller drawled, reining in his horse at the edge of Kelly's property. His eyes moved between Kelly and Bo with calculating malice. Ain't this cozy? The rich rancher and the poor widow playing house. State your business, Miller, Bo said coldly. Then get off this property. Free country, ain't it? Woman's got no husband to tell me otherwise. Miller's gaze slid to Kelly, and Bo felt his jaw tighten at the disrespect in the man's eyes. Heard in town you've been spending nights out here, Callahan. Got folks talking, wondering what kind of arrangement you 2 have worked out regarding that debt. Kelly's face went pale, then flushed with anger. How dare you? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Miller interrupted, his tone mock innocent. Wealthy man, pretty widow, convenient way to settle accounts. Hell, maybe Callahan's getting the better end of that deal after all. Bo moved before conscious thought caught up with action. He crossed the distance to Miller's horse in 3 long strides, reached up, and dragged the man from his saddle. Miller hit the ground hard, the air whooshing from his lungs, and before he could recover, Bo had him by the shirt front, lifted half off the ground. You want to repeat that, Miller? Bo's voice was deadly quiet. Because I didn't quite hear you. Thought maybe you said something insulting about Mrs. Bishop, but I must have been mistaken. Because no man with half a brain would be stupid enough to insult a widow in front of me. Miller's eyes widened with fear, but alcohol and bravado made him foolish. Everyone knows what's going on here, Callahan. You can dress it up however you want, but Bo's fist connected with Miller's jaw before the man could finish. Miller went down like a felled tree, blood spraying from his split lip. His 2 companions reached for their guns, but froze when they found themselves staring down the barrel of Bo's Colt, drawn so fast they hadn't even seen him move. Anyone else want to share their opinions? Bo asked pleasantly, though his eyes were chips of ice. The 2 men shook their heads mutely, hands carefully away from their weapons. Good. Now you're going to pick up your friend here, get on your horses, and ride back to town. And on the way, you're going to think real hard about the difference between what you think you know and what you can prove. You're going to think about how Mrs. Bishop is a decent woman trying to provide for her children, and how I'm here because I choose to be, helping a neighbor in need the way any decent person would. Bo holstered his gun and hauled Miller to his feet, then shoved him toward his horse. You're also going to spread the word in town that anyone who has something to say about Mrs. Bishop's reputation can come say it to my face. You tell them Bo Callahan said so. You got that? Miller, still dazed, nodded as his companions helped him into his saddle. Got it. And Miller, I catch you on this property again, or hear one more word of gossip about Mrs. Bishop from your mouth, I won't be so gentle. Clear? Clear, Miller mumbled through his bloodied lip. The 3 men rode off, considerably faster than they'd arrived, leaving Bo standing in the yard with adrenaline still coursing through his veins and his knuckles starting to throb. He turned to find Kelly staring at him, her expression unreadable. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did. Bo flexed his hand, checking for broken bones. None, but he'd have some bruising by morning. No man talks about you that way. Not while I'm breathing. You realize what you've done, don't you? Kelly's voice was strained. You've just confirmed every ugly rumor that's going around. When word gets back to town that you punched Frank Miller over me, people are going to assume, let them assume whatever they want, Bo interrupted. I know the truth. You know the truth. Anyone whose opinion matters will know the truth. The rest can go to hell. That's easy for you to say. You're a wealthy man. Scandal slides off you like water off a duck. But I'm a widow with 5 children trying to survive in a small town where reputation is everything. If people think Kelly's voice broke. I can't afford to have people think badly of me, Bo. I need this community. I need to be able to hold my head up in church, to have people willing to trade with me, to have my daughters able to make decent marriages someday. You've just made all of that so much harder. The truth of her words hit Bo like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on defending Kelly's honor that he hadn't stopped to think about how his actions might affect her reputation.
In trying to protect her, he might have done irreparable harm. "I'm sorry," Bo said, the words inadequate but sincere. "I didn't think. I just reacted. I'll go into town tomorrow, make it clear to everyone that nothing improper has happened here. I'll explain that I was supervising the harvest to protect my investment, nothing more. It won't matter," Kelly said tiredly. "Once people start talking, explanations don't help. They just feed the gossip." She sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly looking older than her years. "Maybe you should go, Bo. Go back to your ranch tonight. Let me finish the harvest alone. At least then the talk will die down." "No. Bo, no," he repeated firmly. He sat down beside her on the steps, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone. If there's going to be talk, let it be talk about how I helped a neighbor in need. Let it be talk about how a wealthy rancher remembered what it was like to struggle and chose mercy over profit. Let it be talk about anything except me abandoning you when things got difficult." Kelly looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," Bo thought, the realization hitting him with the force of a lightning strike. "Because somewhere between arriving here to collect a debt and this moment, you've become the most important person in my world. Because the thought of riding away from here and never seeing you again makes me feel like I'm being ripped in half." But he couldn't say any of that. Saying it would make it real, would give it power, would force him to confront feelings he wasn't ready to acknowledge. So instead, he said, "Because you asked me if I was the bad man, and I'm trying very hard not to be." Kelly reached over and took his hand, carefully avoiding the bandaged blisters. "You're not the bad man, Bo. You're the best man I've ever known, and that terrifies me." "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I'm starting to care about you, more than I should, more than is wise." Kelly's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And in 3 days, you're going to ride away from here and back to your life. And I'm going to be left with 5 children and a heart that hurts in a way it hasn't hurt since Samuel died. Only this time it'll hurt worse, because with Samuel I was young and stupid and thought love was enough. But now I'm older and I know better, and I'm choosing to care about you anyway, even though I know how this story ends." Bo squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "Kelly, don't," she interrupted gently. "Don't say anything. Not now. Let's just finish the harvest. Let's just get through these next few days. Then you can ride away with your money and your clear conscience, and I can start the long process of forgetting how you made me feel." She stood and walked back toward the wheat field without looking back, leaving Bo sitting on the porch steps with his hand still warm from her touch and his heart in pieces. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon, the easy camaraderie of the morning replaced by a tense awareness of everything unspoken between them. By the time the sun began to set, they'd cut nearly 3/4 of the field, and both of them were stumbling with exhaustion. "That's enough for today," Bo said, his voice hoarse from the heat and dust. "We'll finish tomorrow." Kelly nodded wordlessly and trudged back to the house. Bo watched her go, then made his way to his camp by the creek. He stripped off his shirt, wet with sweat, and dunked his head in the cold water, trying to clear his thoughts. He was in love with Kelly Mae Bishop. There was no point denying it anymore. She'd worked her way past every defense he'd built, every lesson he'd learned from Catherine's betrayal. Kelly with her stubborn pride and gentle strength, her fierce love for her children, and her refusal to surrender to circumstances that would have broken a lesser person. But what did that change? He was still a wealthy rancher with a big empty house and a reputation to maintain. She was still a widow with 5 children and a farm to run and a community she needed to survive. There was no future where their worlds merged without one of them sacrificing everything they'd built. Bo dried himself off and pulled on a clean shirt, then sat by his fire and tried to eat beans he couldn't taste. As darkness fell, he noticed storm clouds building on the western horizon, their tops lit by the dying sun like mountains of copper and gold. Another storm coming. He wondered if Kelly was preparing the children, singing them songs to ease their fear. He wondered if she was scared herself, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, pretending to be brave. Bo was still watching the approaching storm when he heard footsteps. He turned to find Sarah, Kelly's eldest daughter, standing at the edge of his camp. She looked nervous but determined, her thin arms wrapped around herself. Mr. Callahan, can I talk to you? Of course, come sit. Bo gestured to a log he'd pulled near the fire. Is something wrong? Is your mother? Mama's fine. Well, not fine. She's crying again. She thinks we can't hear her, but I can. Sarah sat down, her young face troubled. I heard what that man said today. The mean one you hit. I heard what he said about Mama and you. Bo's stomach sank. Sarah, I want you to know. I know it's not true, Sarah interrupted. I know you're just helping us with the harvest. But other people don't know that, and they're going to say mean things about Mama. They already do sometimes, in town.
I hear them when they think I'm not listening. What do they say? Bo asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. They say she's too proud for a widow, that she should have taken charity when it was offered, or should have moved in with her sister in Laramie. They say she's teaching her children to be proud too, like that's a bad thing. Sarah's voice trembled with suppressed anger. They don't understand that Mama works so hard because she loves us. Everything she does is for us. And now people are going to say even worse things, and it's not fair. Bo studied the girl, 8 years old and already carrying the weight of adult concerns. You're right, it's not fair. But life rarely is, Sarah. The question is what we do about unfairness when we encounter it. What can we do? We can't stop people from talking. No, but we can live our lives in a way that makes their talk meaningless. Your mother knows who she is, a strong, decent woman doing her best to raise her children right. That knowledge is more powerful than any gossip. Bo paused, choosing his words carefully. And I can make sure everyone in town knows that nothing improper has happened here, that I was simply helping a neighbor in need. Will they believe you? The ones who matter will, the ones who don't. Bo shrugged. Their opinions aren't worth your mother's worry. Sarah was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Then she asked, Do you love my mama, Mr. Callahan? Bo felt like he'd been punched. Sarah, it's okay if you do. I think I'd like it if you did. Sarah looked at him with eyes far too old for her face. Mama's been sad for a long time. Even before Papa died, she was sad. Papa wasn't always nice to her, especially when he drank the bad water. But you're nice to her. You look at her like she matters. She does matter, Bo said quietly. Very much. Then why are you going to leave? The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable because Bo didn't have a good answer. Why was he planning to leave? Because it was safe? Because staying would require him to change everything about the life he'd built? Because loving Kelly meant risking the kind of pain he'd sworn never to feel again? It's complicated, Sarah. That's what grown-ups always say when they're making things harder than they need to be. Sarah stood up, brushing dirt from her worn dress. I should get back. Just wanted you to know that if you decide to stay, if you decide you want to be part of our family, that would be okay with me. I think it would be okay with all of us. She walked away before Bo could respond, leaving him staring into the fire with his heart in turmoil and his carefully ordered world crumbling around him. The storm hit around midnight, and it was fierce. Bo lay in his bedroll under the barn's overhang, listening to thunder that sounded like the end of the world and watching lightning that turned night into stuttering day. The wind howled across the prairie, tearing at anything not secured, and rain fell in sheets so thick Bo couldn't see the house through it. Then he heard it, a loud crack followed by a crash. Something had fallen. Something big. Bo grabbed his hat and coat and ran toward the sound, squinting through the rain. As lightning flashed, he saw what had happened. A section of the barn roof had torn loose, the old boards and shingles no match for the wind. The horses inside were screaming in panic, and Bo could see Kelly's milk cow trying to break free from her stall. He didn't hesitate. Bo ran into the barn, immediately soaked from the rain pouring through the damaged roof. The animals were in a panic, eyes rolling white, hooves striking at anything nearby. Bo started with the cow, talking to her in low, soothing tones as he unlatched the stall and guided her out toward the back door that opened into a paddock. The horses were more difficult. They were terrified, rearing and kicking, but Bo had handled spooked horses before. He approached each one carefully, voice steady despite the chaos around him, and led them one by one to safety. He was releasing the last horse when Kelly appeared in the barn entrance, soaked through and breathing hard. Bo, what are you? Roof's damaged, Bo shouted over the storm. Had to get the animals out. We need to secure that section before the whole thing collapses. Kelly nodded and ran back toward the house, returning moments later with rope and a hammer. Together they worked in the driving rain, securing the loose boards as best they could, Bo on the roof hammering nails, while Kelly held the rope to pull the damaged section back into place. It was dangerous work. The roof was slick with rain, the wind threatened to tear them off with every gust, and lightning struck close enough that Bo felt the hair on his arms stand on end. But they kept working, kept fighting the storm, until finally they'd secured the worst of the damage well enough to last until morning. Bo climbed down from the roof, his hands bleeding through the bandages, his body aching from exertion and cold. Kelly looked up at him, rain streaming down her face, and suddenly she was laughing, wild, almost hysterical laughter that was part relief and part sheer exhaustion. "What?" Bo asked, bewildered. "You're on my roof in the middle of a thunderstorm, bleeding all over yourself, covered in mud and rain, and you look absolutely miserable." Kelly gasped between bursts of laughter. "This is your idea of protecting your investment?" Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the fear, Bo found himself laughing too. "I've made some questionable business decisions in my time, but this might be the worst." They stood there in the storm, laughing like lunatics, until Kelly suddenly wasn't laughing anymore. She was staring at Bo with an expression he couldn't read, and then she was moving toward him, and then Kelly kissed him. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was fierce and desperate and full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say. Her hands fisted in his wet shirt, pulling him closer, and Bo's arms came around her automatically, holding her tight against him as the storm raged around them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kelly whispered, "Don't leave. Please, Bo. Don't leave." "Kelly, I know all the reasons why you should. I know it's complicated and people will talk and we barely know each other and you have your life and I have mine. I know all of that, but I'm asking anyway. Don't leave." Bo cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing rainwater from her cheeks. "If I stay, everything changes. My life, your life, everything. I know. People will talk. Let them talk. Your children already love you. Sarah told me tonight. She said she's never seen me smile the way I smile when you're around." Kelly's voice broke. "And God help me. I love you too. I know it's too soon and too fast, and I'm probably making the biggest mistake of my life, but I love you, Bo Callahan. I love your kindness disguised as gruffness, and your strength that you use to protect instead of dominate, and the way you transplanted roses because you knew I liked flowers but couldn't tell me directly. I love that you're terrified of being hurt again, but you're here anyway. I love—" Bo kissed her again, cutting off her words because if he let her keep talking, his heart was going to burst right out of his chest. This kiss was different, slower, deeper, full of promise instead of desperation. When they finally made it back to the house, soaked and muddy and grinning like fools, they found all 5 children crowded at the window, watching. Thomas was pumping his fist in victory. Martha was clapping, and even Sarah, mature, worried Sarah, was smiling. "I guess we have an audience," Kelly said, blushing. "I guess we do," Bo agreed. Then, surprising himself, he took Kelly's hand and led her toward the house. "Come on, let's go talk to them. If I'm staying, and I am staying, we should do this right." They walked into the house together, dripping water everywhere, and faced 5 pairs of expectant eyes. "Children," Kelly began, her voice slightly unsteady, "Mr. Callahan and I have something to tell you." "You're getting married," Martha shouted, bouncing on her toes. "We haven't exactly—" Bo started. "Can I be in the wedding?" Mary interrupted. "Me too," Martha added. "Does this mean we get to call you Papa?" Thomas asked, his voice small and hopeful. Sarah just smiled, that knowing 2-adult smile that said she'd seen this coming all along. Bo looked at Kelly helplessly, and she looked back at him with laughter and love and exasperation all mixed together in her beautiful face. Then she shrugged as if to say, "Well, are we getting married?" And Bo, who'd sworn never to trust anyone again, who'd spent 7 years building walls around his heart, who'd thought he'd learned the lessons love had to teach him, found himself getting down on one knee in the middle of Kelly's kitchen, covered in mud and blood and rain,
with 5 children watching and his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Kelly Mae Bishop," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I didn't come here looking for this. I came here to collect a debt. But somewhere between that first day and now, you've given me something far more valuable than money.
You've given me hope. You've reminded me what it means to be brave, to fight for what matters, to put love before safety. You've shown me that being strong doesn't mean being hard, and that mercy isn't weakness, it's the truest form of strength." He took her work-roughened hand in his. "I don't have a ring, and this isn't exactly a romantic proposal, but I'm asking anyway, will you marry me? Will you let me help you raise these beautiful children? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve the gift you're giving me?" Kelly was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face to mix with the rain still dripping from her hair. "Yes. God help us both, yes." The children erupted in cheers, and suddenly, Bo was surrounded by small bodies hugging him, climbing on him, talking all at once. Martha insisted on planning the wedding right that moment. Thomas wanted to know if they could have a dog now that they'd have a papa who could afford one. Mary asked if this meant they were going to be rich. Sarah just hugged him and whispered, "Thank you for making my mama happy." Baby James, woken by the commotion, started crying, and Kelly laughed through her tears as she went to fetch him. "Welcome to your new family, Bo Callahan. It's chaos and noise and nobody ever has a moment's peace." Bo, surrounded by children and looking at Kelly holding her baby with love shining in her eyes, thought it was the most beautiful chaos he'd ever seen. They spent the rest of the night drying off and calming the children, answering 100 questions about the wedding and what their new life would look like. By the time the sun rose, painting the storm-washed world in shades of gold and rose, Bo and Kelly were sitting on the porch steps, shoulders touching, watching the dawn together. "The debt," Kelly said quietly. "I can still pay it. The wheat's almost harvested. And keep your money," Bo interrupted. "Use it for the children, new clothes, better food, whatever they need. The debt is forgiven." "Bo, I can't consider it a wedding gift, or an investment in our future, or whatever makes you comfortable accepting it." Bo took her hand. "Besides, I'm fairly certain that once we're married, your debts become my debts anyway. So technically, I'd be paying myself back, which seems like a waste of effort." Kelly laughed, then sobered. "People really are going to talk, you know, about how quickly this happened, about how convenient it is for the poor widow to snag the wealthy rancher." "Let them talk," Bo said firmly. "Anyone who knows me knows I don't do anything out of convenience. I do things because they're right. And loving you, Kelly, that's the rightest thing I've ever done." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children emerge from the house to explore the storm-washed yard. The wheat field sparkled with raindrops, and the transplanted roses by the porch, miraculously unharmed by the storm, already looked more settled in their new home. "I was so scared," Kelly admitted quietly. "When the roof started to come off and I knew the animals were trapped, I was terrified. Not just of losing them, but of you getting hurt trying to save them." "I was scared too," Bo confessed. "Not of the storm, but of the feeling that if something happened to you or your children, I'd never recover. That scared me more than any wind or lightning could." Kelly rested her head on his shoulder, and Bo wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. The sun continued its rise, burning away the last of the storm clouds, and Bo thought about how, just a week ago, he'd ridden into this valley expecting nothing more than to collect a debt and acquire some land. Instead, he'd found everything he'd been missing without knowing it. He'd found a home. He'd found a family. He'd found a reason to be brave again. "When should we get married?" Kelly asked. "Should we wait a few months, do it properly?" "We could," Bo said slowly. "Or we could ride into town tomorrow, find the preacher, and do it right away. Save both our reputations and give people one less thing to gossip about." Kelly pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "You're serious? You want to get married that quickly?" "I've wasted 7 years being cautious and careful and protecting myself from pain," Bo said. "I don't want to waste another day. If you'll have me, broken walls and trust issues and all, I'd like to marry you as soon as possible." "Tomorrow then," Kelly decided, her eyes shining. "We'll get married tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Bo agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss as the sun rose on the first day of their new life together. But morning brought complications neither of them had anticipated. Bo woke before dawn, his body still aching from the previous night's storm work, to find Jack Devereaux riding hard toward the Bishop homestead, his face grave in the gray pre-dawn light. "Boss," Jack called out as he dismounted, "we got trouble, big trouble." Bo emerged from the barn where he'd been checking the animals, immediately alert. "What kind of trouble?" "Frank Miller and his boys rode into Laramie last night, spread word about what happened here. By the time I heard about it in town this morning, half the territory thinks you and Mrs. Bishop have been—" Jack trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, they're saying things that ain't fit to repeat, but that's not the worst of it." "What's the worst of it?" "Miller's cousin is deputy sheriff in Laramie. He's claiming Mrs. Bishop used improper means to gain an extension on her debt, and he's talking about bringing charges. Says it's his duty to protect vulnerable widows from being taken advantage of by wealthy men." Jack's expression was disgusted. "It's all horseshit, of course, but he's making enough noise that the sheriff's taking notice. They could make real problems for you both." Bo felt rage surge through him, hot and immediate. "They're threatening to bring charges against Kelly for what? I gave her an extension of my own free will. There's nothing illegal or improper about it." "Maybe not, but perception's a powerful thing, boss. And right now the perception is that a wealthy rancher's been taking advantage of a desperate widow." Jack paused, then added quietly, "There's also talk about taking the children away, putting them in an orphanage until a proper investigation can be conducted into Mrs. Bishop's fitness as a mother." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Bo grabbed Jack's arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "They're threatening to take her children?" "It's just talk right now, but—" Bo didn't wait to hear the rest. He strode toward the house, his mind racing. Kelly was already up, probably had been for hours, making breakfast for the children. He found her at the stove, humming softly, looking more peaceful than he'd seen her since he'd arrived. That peace was about to be shattered. "Kelly," Bo said from the doorway, "we need to talk, now." Something in his tone made her turn immediately, her smile fading. "What's wrong?" Bo told her everything Jack had reported, watching the color drain from her face with each word. By the time he finished, Kelly was gripping the edge of the stove so hard her knuckles had gone white. "They want to take my children," she whispered. "Because of me. Because I let you help me. Because I—" Her voice broke. "This is my fault. If I hadn't been so weak, if I just figured out a way to manage on my own—" "Stop." Bo crossed the room and took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "This is not your fault. This is Frank Miller being a vindictive bastard because I hit him. This is small-minded people with nothing better to do than destroy what they don't understand. But it's not your fault, and I'm not going to let them hurt you or take your children." "How are you going to stop them?" "They have the law on their side, or at least the appearance of it." Kelly's eyes were wild with fear. "If the deputy really pushes this, if they start an investigation, Bo, I can't lose my children. I can't. I'd rather die than—" "You're not going to lose them," Bo said firmly. "We're going to fix this. Right now." "How?" "By getting married. Today. This morning. We ride into town, find the preacher, get married in front of witnesses, and make it clear to everyone that our relationship is legitimate and honorable. Once we're married, they can't claim you used improper means to settle the debt. You'll be my wife, and a husband helping his wife is perfectly natural and legal." Kelly searched his face, her expression anguished. "Bo, I can't ask you to do this. Not like this. Not because you're being forced into it by ugly rumors and legal threats. That's not fair to you. You're not asking. I'm offering, and I'm not being forced into anything." Bo's voice gentled. "Kelly, I asked you to marry me last night. That hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is the timeline. So instead of tomorrow, we do it today. Instead of a nice ceremony with time to plan, we do something quick and simple. But the outcome's the same. You become my wife, I become your husband, and we build a life together." "But you deserve better than this," Kelly protested. "You deserve a proper courtship, a real wedding, not some rushed ceremony born out of desperation and scandal." "What I deserve," Bo said, "is to wake up every morning next to the woman I love. What I deserve is to help raise 5 incredible children and build something real and lasting. What I deserve is a second chance at happiness. And Kelly, you're giving me that. Everything else is just details." Tears spilled down Kelly's cheeks. "You really mean that?"
Every word. Bo wiped her tears with his thumbs. Now, are you going to marry me today? Or are we going to stand here arguing while Frank Miller and his cronies try to destroy your life? Despite everything, Kelly laughed, a watery, shaky sound, but genuine. You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. Takes one to know one, Bo countered. Now get the children ready. We're going to town. An hour later, they set out in Bo's wagon. Kelly, Bo, and all 5 children dressed in their Sunday best, which in the children's case meant clothes that were threadbare but clean and carefully mended. Sarah held baby James while the younger children chattered excitedly about the wedding, too young to fully understand the circumstances but picking up on the adults' tension. Jack rode ahead to arrange things, and by the time they arrived in Dry Creek, a crowd had already gathered. Word of their arrival had spread fast, too fast, and Bo realized with a sinking feeling that Frank Miller had been busy. The crowd wasn't friendly. As Bo helped Kelly down from the wagon, he could hear muttered comments, see the judgment in people's eyes. A few women turned their backs pointedly, making their disapproval clear. Men who'd once tipped their hats to Kelly now stared at her with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. Kelly's spine straightened, her chin lifting in that defiant way Bo had come to know so well. She held baby James close and gathered her children around her like a mother hen protecting her chicks. Ignore them, Bo muttered, offering her his arm. They don't matter. But they did matter, and Kelly knew it. These were the people she'd have to live among, do business with, raise her children alongside. Their opinions had weight and consequences that went far beyond hurt feelings. They were halfway to the church when Frank Miller stepped into their path, his bruised jaw a testament to Bo's fist. Behind him stood his cousin, a weaselly man with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest and a smirk on his face. Well, well, Miller drawled, if it ain't the happy couple. Come to make an honest woman of her, Callahan? Bo's hand went to his gun, but Kelly's grip on his arm tightened, holding him back. Don't, she whispered. That's what they want. Don't give them an excuse. You hear that, boys? Miller called out to the crowd. The widow's got a rich man on a short leash already. That was fast work, Mrs. Bishop. Your husband's barely cold in the ground, and you've already secured yourself a new meal ticket. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in discomfort at Miller's crudeness. Bo felt Kelly tremble beside him, felt the effort it took for her to hold her head high and not respond to the provocation. But Thomas, 6-year-old Thomas with his father's temper and his mother's protective instincts, darted forward before anyone could stop him. You take that back. My mama's not like that. She's good, and she works hard, and she doesn't need your mean words. Miller laughed cruelly. Someone should teach that boy some manners, though I suppose that's what happens when a woman tries to raise children without a man's firm hand. That did it. Bo released Kelly's arm and stepped forward, putting himself between Miller and the children. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly in the sudden silence. Frank Miller, you're a coward and a bully. You spread lies because you can't stand to see a good woman succeed where you've failed. You mock a widow because you're too small a man to admire her strength. And you insult her children because you know you could never raise kids half as fine as hers. Bo's hand rested on his gun. Now, you can apologize to Mrs. Bishop and her son, or you can back up your words like a man. Your choice. Miller's face flushed red. His hand twitched toward his own gun, but his cousin, the deputy, grabbed his arm. Don't be a fool, Frank. Callahan's got witnesses. You draw on him and he'll kill you legally. For a long moment, the town square was frozen in tension, the whole crowd holding its breath. Then a new voice cut through the silence. That's enough. Reverend Samuel Clayton, the Methodist minister who'd presided over Samuel Bishop's funeral, pushed through the crowd. He was an older man, white-haired and dignified, with eyes that had seen every kind of human folly and learned compassion from it. Frank Miller, I've known you since you were a boy, pulling girls' pigtails and stealing apples from Mrs. Henderson's orchard. You were a bully then, and you're a bully now. The Reverend's voice was stern. Mrs. Bishop is a member of my congregation. I've watched her struggle to feed her children, watched her work herself half to death to keep a roof over their heads, watched her maintain her dignity and faith through trials that would break most people. If she's found someone willing to share that burden with her, I say God bless them both. But Reverend Miller started. I'm not finished. Clayton's tone could have frozen water. As for you, Deputy Morrison, if you're really concerned about the welfare of children, perhaps you should investigate the families where fathers drink away their wages and beat their wives. I can give you a list if you'd like. But Mrs. Bishop's children are clean, well-behaved, and clearly loved. Any fool can see that. The deputy shifted uncomfortably under the Reverend's glare. I was just responding to concerns raised by citizens, by one citizen with a personal grudge and a reputation for dishonesty, Clayton corrected. Now, I believe Mr. Callahan and Mrs. Bishop are here for a wedding. Shall we proceed, or would you like to continue this display and prove to everyone that Frank Miller runs this town instead of decent people with decent values? The challenge hung in the air. Slowly, reluctantly, Miller and his cousin stepped aside. The crowd parted, creating a path to the church, and Reverend Clayton offered his arm to Kelly. Come, my dear, let's get you properly married before any more fools make themselves known. Kelly took his arm gratefully, her eyes shining with tears. Thank you, Reverend. Thank me by being happy, Clayton said gently. You've earned it. They processed into the small church, and despite the hostile crowd outside, inside they found friends. Jack Devereaux was there, of course, standing as Beau's witness. But there were others too. Martha Henderson, the apple orchard owner the Reverend had mentioned, who'd always been kind to Kelly. Tom Pritchard from the grain elevator, who'd promised to buy her wheat. The school teacher, Miss Emily Warren, who'd taught Sarah for the past 2 years. Not many, but enough. Enough to show that Kelly wasn't completely alone, that some people saw through the lies to the truth beneath. The ceremony was simple and quick, conducted in the warm sunlight streaming through the church's plain glass windows. Beau had no ring to offer, so he gave Kelly his mother's wedding band, the one thing of value he'd kept from his childhood, carried with him for years without really knowing why. It fit Kelly's finger as if it had been made for her. Do you, Beau Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Beau said firmly, his eyes never leaving Kelly's face. And do you, Kelly May Bishop, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Kelly whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and Almighty God, I pronounce you man and wife. Mr. Callahan, you may kiss your bride. Beau cupped Kelly's face in his hands and kissed her gently, reverently, sealing the promise they'd made. Behind them, the children cheered, and even crusty Jack Devereaux looked suspiciously misty-eyed. They signed the marriage certificate with the required witnesses, Jack and Martha Henderson. And just like that, it was done. Kelly May Bishop became Kelly May Callahan, and 5 children gained a father, and Beau gained the family he'd thought he'd never have. But as they emerged from the church, the hostile crowd was still there, and Beau knew the hard part was just beginning. Marriage certificate or not, people would talk. They'd question the speed of the courtship, speculate about Kelly's motives, treat Beau like a fool who'd been taken in by a scheming widow. Let them, Beau thought fiercely. Let them talk until their tongues fell out. He knew the truth, and so did Kelly, and that was all that mattered. He was helping Kelly into the wagon when a rock flew out of the crowd, striking the wagon bed with a sharp crack. The children screamed, and Kelly instinctively covered baby James with her body. Beau spun around, fury blazing in his eyes. Who threw that? No one answered, but he could see faces in the crowd, some smirking, others looking away in shame. Beau climbed onto the wagon seat and stood so everyone could see him. Listen to me, all of you. I'm going to say this once, and I'm going to say it clearly. Kelly Callahan, my wife, is the finest woman I've ever known. She's worked harder, sacrificed more, and shown more courage than most of you will manage in your entire lives. She agreed to marry me not because she needed my money, but because I needed her strength. I needed her goodness. I needed to learn how to be human again after I'd spent years turning myself into something cold and hard. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but Beau wasn't finished. Some of you are judging her because you think she moved too fast after Samuel's death. Let me ask you something. How long is a woman supposed to mourn a man who drank away her security and left her to raise 5 children alone? How long is she supposed to suffer before she's allowed to find happiness? You tell me, because I'd like to know what the rule is. Silence. No one met his eyes. That's what I thought. You don't have an answer because there is no answer. There's just gossip and judgment, and people who feel better about their own mediocre lives by tearing down someone who's doing better than they are. Beau's voice was hard as iron. Well, here's what's going to happen. Kelly and I are married legally and properly. We're going to raise these children together. We're going to build a life together, and anyone who has a problem with that can come talk to me directly. But if I hear one more word of gossip, if I hear anyone speaking ill of my wife or frightening my children, he let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. He climbed down from the wagon, helped Kelly up, and gathered the children in the back. As they prepared to leave, Reverend Clayton approached one more time. "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan, may I offer you some advice?" "Of course, Reverend," Kelly said. "Don't try to live here. In town, I mean. The gossip will be relentless, and your children will hear things no child should hear. Keep the farm as your home. Let time and your actions prove your critics wrong. In a year, maybe 2, when people see how happy you are, how well the children are thriving, this will all be forgotten." "What if it's not forgotten?" Kelly asked quietly. "Then you'll have each other, and that will be enough." Clayton smiled. "I've married a lot of couples in my years as a minister. Some marry for love, some for convenience, some for desperation. But every now and then I marry 2 people who are clearly meant to find each other, who make each other better than they were alone. You 2 are that kind of couple. Don't let small-minded people rob you of that gift." "Thank you, Reverend," Beau said, shaking the minister's hand, "for everything." "Just be happy. That's all the thanks I need." They rode out of town in silence, the children subdued now, the excitement of the wedding dampened by the ugliness they'd witnessed. Kelly sat beside Beau, her hand clasped tightly in his, baby James sleeping against her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said quietly after they'd put some distance between themselves and town. "I'm sorry you had to defend me like that. Sorry your marriage started with rocks and accusations instead of celebration and joy." "Don't apologize for other people's ugliness," Beau said firmly. "Our marriage started with truth and love and commitment. The rest is just noise." "Loud noise," Thomas piped up from the back of the wagon. "That lady called Mama a bad word. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was bad by how she said it." Beau and Kelly exchanged glances. They'd hoped the children hadn't heard the worst of it, but clearly that had been foolish. "Thomas," Beau said, turning to address the boy directly, "some people say mean things when they're scared or angry or jealous. It doesn't make the words true. Your mama is a good woman, the best woman, and anyone who says different is lying. You understand?" "Yes, sir, but why are they lying about Mama?" "Because it makes them feel powerful, to tear down someone they see as weak. But they're wrong about your mama being weak. She's the strongest person I know." "Stronger than you?" Thomas asked skeptically. "Much stronger than me," Beau confirmed. "I just hide my weakness better." That seemed to satisfy Thomas, and gradually the children's natural resilience reasserted itself. By the time they reached the farm, Martha and Mary were singing, Sarah was telling them stories about the wedding, and even Thomas had cheered up. But as Beau helped Kelly down from the wagon, he saw the strain in her face, the way her hands trembled slightly. The day had taken its toll on her, and they both knew it wasn't over yet. "What now?" Kelly asked quietly as the children ran into the house. "What do we do about Frank Miller and his cousin? What if they really do try to bring charges?" "Then we fight them," Beau said. "I'll hire the best lawyer in Wyoming Territory if I have to. I'll call in every favor I'm owed, use every bit of influence I have. They're not taking you or the children. I promise you that." "You can't promise that, Beau. The law is on our side," Beau interrupted. "We're married now, legally, properly, with witnesses. You're my wife, these are our children, and no 2-bit deputy with a grudge is going to change that." Kelly searched his face, looking for certainty she clearly didn't feel herself. "You sound so sure." "I am sure. Because I've learned something these past few days, Kelly. I've learned that the things worth having are worth fighting for. I spent 7 years running away from anything that might hurt me, and you know what? I was miserable. Safe, but miserable.
I don't want to be that man anymore. What kind of man do you want to be? Bo pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. The kind of man who stands and fights. The kind of man who protects what he loves, no matter the cost. The kind of man who's worthy of you. Kelly's arms came around his waist, holding him tight. You're already worthy of me, Bo Callahan. You were worthy from the moment you gave me 7 days instead of taking my land. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, until Sarah's voice called from the house. Mama, Papa, the twins are trying to feed the baby cornbread, and he's making a terrible mess. Papa, Kelly repeated softly, looking up at Bo. The children are calling you Papa. Is that all right? Bo asked, suddenly uncertain. I know I'm not their real father. You're exactly their real father, Kelly interrupted. Real fathers are the ones who show up, who do the work, who love the children in their care. Biology has nothing to do with it. Papa, came the call again, more urgent this time. Baby James is turning blue. He's not turning blue, Sarah's exasperated voice responded. He's just got cornbread all over his face. Bo and Kelly looked at each other and started laughing, real laughter this time, born not of hysteria, but of genuine joy. Then they walked hand in hand toward the house, toward the chaos and noise and beautiful messiness of their new family. Inside, they found exactly what Sarah had described. Baby James covered head to toe in mashed cornbread, the twins looking guilty but unrepentant, and Thomas trying to clean up the mess with a dish towel while actually making it worse. All right, Bo said, surveying the disaster. New rule. Nobody feeds the baby except Mama until he's old enough to feed himself. Agreed? Agreed, the children chorused. Bo rolled up his sleeves and set about helping clean up the mess, Kelly working beside him, both of them bumping into each other in the small space, both of them smiling despite the chaos. This was his life now, cornbread disasters and children's laughter, and the kind of happy confusion he'd never imagined wanting, but he wanted it. God, how he wanted it. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Bo and Kelly sat on the front porch, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The wheat field stretched before them, almost ready for harvest, golden in the fading light. We still need to finish bringing in the wheat, Kelly observed. With all the drama, we lost almost a whole day of work. We'll finish tomorrow, Bo said. Together. Together, Kelly repeated as if testing the word. Oops. I'm still getting used to that, not being alone. Me too. Bo took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Kelly, I need to tell you something about what happens next. She tensed slightly. What do you mean? I mean, we need to figure out where we're going to live. I have the ranch. It's bigger, more comfortable, with room for all the children. But this is your home, and I know it means something to you. I don't want to make that decision without you. Kelly was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the wheat field. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. This land, it represented my independence, my ability to provide for my children without depending on anyone. It was important to me because I'd never had anything that was truly mine before, my father's farm, then Samuel's homestead, always belonging to someone else. I understand if you want to keep it, Bo said. We can... I'm not finished, Kelly interrupted gently. It was important to me. But you know what I've learned this past week? True independence isn't about owning land or not needing anyone. True independence is about choosing your dependencies wisely. It's about finding people you can trust and building something together that's stronger than anything you could build alone. She turned to look at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the first stars. I don't need this land anymore, Bo. I don't need to prove I can survive on my own. I survived. I proved it. Now I want to do more than just survive. I want to live. I want to build a real future with you in whatever home we make together. Are you sure? Bo asked. Because I don't want you to resent giving this up. I'm not giving anything up, Kelly said firmly. I'm choosing something better. There's a difference. Bo pulled her close, kissing her temple. Then we'll go to the ranch. After we finish the harvest, we'll move your things and the children to the Callahan Ranch. It'll be the Callahan family ranch then. The Callahan family ranch? Kelly repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the prairie night came alive with crickets and distant coyote calls. Kelly's head rested on Beau's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist, and both of them were thinking about the future they'd build together, the challenges they'd face, the joys they'd share, the family they'd nurture. "Beau?" Kelly said drowsily. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to change. For being willing to try again. For choosing us." "Thank you for giving me something worth choosing," Beau responded. "For reminding me what it means to be alive instead of just existing." Kelly tilted her face up, and Beau kissed her properly. A slow, sweet kiss that held promises and possibilities and all the hope they'd both thought they'd lost forever. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and human joys. But here on this small patch of Wyoming prairie, two wounded people had found healing in each other, had built something beautiful out of desperation and debt and the unexpected grace of second chances. Tomorrow they'd finish the harvest. Tomorrow they'd start the long process of blending their lives completely, of teaching 5 children to accept a new father, of proving to skeptical neighbors that their marriage was real and lasting. But tonight, they simply held each other and watched the stars and believed, maybe for the first time in years, that happiness wasn't something that happened to other people. It could happen to them too. And it would. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the sound of horses approaching at speed. Beau was already awake, having spent a restless night in the barn. Propriety demanded they not share a bed until they'd properly moved to the ranch, regardless of the marriage certificate. He emerged to find 3 riders coming hard across the prairie, and his hand went instinctively to his gun before he recognized Jack in the lead. "Boss," Jack called out, pulling his horse to a sliding stop. "Deputy Morrison's coming. He's got papers. Says he's conducting an investigation into the children's welfare. He'll be here within the hour." Kelly appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her face pale but composed. She'd heard every word. "Let him come. We have nothing to hide." "Kelly," Beau started. "No." Her voice was firm. "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid. If they want to investigate, let them investigate. They'll find 5 children who are fed, clothed, loved, and cared for. They'll find a mother who's worked herself to the bone to provide for them. Let them look." Beau studied her face and saw the steel beneath her fear. This was the woman who'd faced him down when he'd come to take her land, who'd worked from dawn to dark without complaint, who'd thrown herself between her children and danger without hesitation. Kelly had spent her whole life proving herself to people who doubted her, and she was done apologizing for her strength. "All right," Beau said, "we'll face this together. But I'm sending Jack to Laramie to fetch Judge Henderson. If Morrison tries anything illegal, I want someone with actual authority here to stop him." Jack nodded and wheeled his horse around, but before he could ride off, Kelly called out, "Wait, Judge Henderson, is that any relation to Martha Henderson?" "Her husband," Jack confirmed. "Retired circuit judge, tough as nails but fair. If anyone can put Morrison in his place, it's Judge Henderson." "Then yes, please bring him," Kelly said. "And thank Martha for her kindness yesterday. Tell her it meant the world to me." Jack tipped his hat and rode off at a gallop, leaving a trail of dust hanging in the still morning air. Beau turned to Kelly and saw her hands were trembling despite her brave words. "Come here," he said softly, and she came to him, allowing herself to be held for just a moment before she pulled away and straightened her spine. "I need to get the children ready. If someone's coming to judge whether I'm a fit mother, I want them to see my babies at their best." The next 45 minutes were organized chaos. Kelly scrubbed faces and combed hair while Beau helped the older children dress in their Sunday clothes. Sarah, mature beyond her years, understood the gravity of the situation and helped wrangle the twins while Thomas tried his best to keep baby James entertained and quiet. "Papa?" Thomas asked, and Beau's heart still jumped at the word. "Are they really going to take us away from Mama?" Beau knelt down to the boy's level, looking him straight in the eye. "I won't let that happen, son. I promise you, whatever I have to do, however far I have to go, I will not let anyone separate this family. You understand?" Thomas nodded solemnly, then threw his arms around Beau's neck in a fierce hug. "I'm glad you're our papa now. You're brave like my first papa was, but you're here, and here is better." Bo held the boy tight, his throat closing with emotion. I'm glad I'm here too, Thomas. Gladder than you know. Deputy Morrison arrived precisely when Jack had predicted, but he didn't come alone. With him rode Frank Miller and two other men Bo didn't recognize, all of them armed and looking like they'd come for trouble rather than an investigation. Bo stepped out onto the porch, deliberately positioning himself between the riders and the house where Kelly and the children waited. His hand rested casually on his gun, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. Deputy Morrison, Bo said coolly, this is private property. State your business. Morrison, emboldened by his companions, sat tall in his saddle and produced a paper from his vest. I have an order signed by Sheriff Watson authorizing me to investigate the living conditions and welfare of the minor children residing at this property. I'm here to conduct that investigation. Let me see that order, Bo demanded. Morrison hesitated, then rode forward and handed the paper down. Bo read it carefully, his jaw tightening. It was legal enough, vaguely worded, but giving Morrison broad authority to assess the children's situation. The signature was genuine. This says you can investigate, Bo said, handing the paper back. It doesn't say you can remove the children. And it doesn't say you can bring an armed posse onto my wife's property. So Miller and your friends can wait at the property line while you conduct your investigation. Alone. Those are the terms. I'll conduct this investigation however I see fit, Morrison started. No, you won't. Bo's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. You'll conduct it by the letter of that order, or you won't conduct it at all. I'm not some ignorant farmer you can bully, Morrison. I know the law, I know my rights, and I know that you're here because your cousin got his nose bloodied and wants revenge. So you can do this properly and professionally, or you can ride back to Laramie and explain to Sheriff Watson why you turned a legitimate investigation into a personal vendetta. Morrison's face flushed red, but he knew Bo was right. After a tense moment, he gestured for Miller and the others to fall back. Fine. I'll conduct the investigation alone. But if I find anything at all, that suggests these children are in danger or being neglected, I'm taking them into protective custody. Sheriff's order or not. You do what you think is right, Deputy, Kelly said from the doorway, her voice steady. But you'll find no cause for concern here. My children are well cared for, and anyone with eyes can see it. Morrison dismounted and approached the house, his expression a mix of official seriousness and personal satisfaction at having Kelly on the defensive. Bo wanted to punch that look right off his face, but he forced himself to step back and let Kelly handle this. She was right. The truth was on their side. For the next hour, Morrison conducted his investigation. He examined the house, noting the cleanliness despite the obvious poverty, the beds where the children slept, the pantry stocked with food, not much food, but enough. He questioned each child separately, asking about their mother, their living conditions, whether they felt safe and cared for. Sarah answered with dignity beyond her years, her responses clear and articulate. Thomas was more emotional but equally firm in his defense of his mother. Even the twins, young as they were, managed to convey through their innocent answers that they were loved and happy. Bo watched Kelly's face throughout the ordeal and saw the toll it took on her, the fear carefully hidden beneath a calm exterior, the way her hands clenched whenever Morrison questioned one of her children, the rigid set of her shoulders as she endured this invasion of her family's privacy and dignity. Finally, Morrison concluded his examination and stepped back onto the porch where Bo and Kelly waited. His expression was frustrated, almost disappointed, as if he'd hoped to find evidence of neglect or abuse. The children appear to be adequately cared for, he admitted grudgingly. The house is clean, there's food, they're clothed and show no signs of mistreatment. Because there is no mistreatment, Kelly said quietly. There never was. This entire investigation was built on gossip and spite, and you know it. What I know, Morrison said sharply, is that a woman in your position, a widow with 5 children and no visible means of support, married a wealthy man with suspicious speed. That raises questions about your judgment and your fitness as a mother. My judgment? Kelly's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. My judgment kept 5 children fed and sheltered for 2 months after my husband died. My judgment turned a failing wheat crop into a successful harvest. My judgment recognized a good man when I met one, regardless of how quickly it happened. You want to question my judgment, Deputy? Question your own first. You rode out here with an armed posse to intimidate a widow and her children because your cousin got his feelings hurt. Whose judgment should really be in question here? Morrison's face darkened with anger. You watch your tone, or what? Kelly took a step forward, and Bo saw the full force of her fury unleashed. You'll take my children? On what grounds? Because I married a man who treats them kindly? Because I chose security for my family over playing the tragic widow for the entertainment of small-minded gossips? Because I had the audacity to stop struggling and accept help when it was offered? Kelly, Bo said quietly, touching her arm. He could see Morrison looking for an excuse, any excuse, to escalate this situation. Let me handle this. But Kelly shook off his hand. She'd been pushed too far, endured too much, and something in her had snapped. No, Bo. I've spent my entire adult life letting men handle things. Samuel handled things right into debt and an early grave. Other men have tried to handle me with lies and propositions and judgment. I'm done letting men handle my life. She turned back to Morrison. You came here looking for evidence of neglect. You found well-fed, well-dressed, happy children living with two parents who loved them. That's not neglect, Deputy. That's exactly what every child should have. So unless you have actual legal grounds to pursue this further, I suggest you get off my property and go find some real criminals to chase. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison looked like he'd been slapped, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Bo felt a surge of pride and love so intense it nearly knocked him off his feet. This woman, his wife, was magnificent. The standoff was broken by the sound of more horses approaching. Jack was returning, and with him rode a distinguished older gentleman with white hair and a bearing that spoke of authority and education. Judge Henderson, no doubt. Behind them, to Bo's surprise, came Reverend Clayton and Martha Henderson, along with a dozen other townspeople, including Tom Pritchard from the grain elevator and Miss Emily Warren, the school teacher. Judge Henderson dismounted with the ease of a man who'd spent his life on horseback and approached the porch with measured steps. Deputy Morrison, what's the meaning of this investigation? Morrison straightened, suddenly uncertain. Judge Henderson, I didn't know, that is, I have authorization from Sheriff Watson to investigate allegations of child neglect, Henderson interrupted, pulling out his own copy of the order. I've read it. I've also spoken with several citizens who have something to say about Mrs. Callahan's character and fitness as a mother. Perhaps we should hear from them before you make any decisions about these children's welfare. Morrison looked trapped, but he couldn't refuse a request from Judge Henderson without appearing petty. Of course, Your Honor. Henderson gestured to Martha, who stepped forward with the quiet confidence of a woman who'd been a frontier wife for 40 years and feared nothing except God and dirty dishes. I've known Kelly Bishop, Kelly Callahan now, for 3 years, Martha said clearly. I've watched her struggle and sacrifice and work herself near to death for those children. When other women in town turned up their noses at her poverty, she held her head high. When her husband drank away their money, she found ways to feed her babies anyway. When Samuel died, she didn't collapse or beg for charity. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. If that's not a fit mother, Deputy Morrison, then you'd better come investigate me too, because I raised 7 children using the exact same approach. Tom Pritchard spoke next. Mrs. Callahan approached me 3 weeks ago about selling her wheat harvest. She had it all figured out, exactly how much she needed, what price she could accept, when she could deliver. She wasn't looking for special treatment or sympathy, just a fair deal for good wheat. That's not the behavior of someone who's unfit or irresponsible. That's good business sense, Miss Warren added her voice. Sarah Callahan has been my student for 2 years. She's bright, well-behaved, and clearly comes from a home where education is valued despite their financial struggles. Mrs. Callahan has never missed a teacher conference, never failed to send Sarah to school clean, and as well-dressed as their circumstances allow. She's involved in her children's education and well-being. Again, those are not the actions of an unfit mother. One by one, others stepped forward with similar testimonies. People who'd witnessed Kelly's strength, her dedication to her children, her refusal to surrender to circumstances that would have crushed most people. Even people who'd been part of yesterday's hostile crowd now looked ashamed, seeing the situation through clearer eyes. Finally, Reverend Clayton spoke. Deputy Morrison, I've been a minister for 35 years. I've seen every kind of family situation you can imagine. Good parents and bad, loving homes and neglectful ones. I've officiated at Mrs. Callahan's first wedding, presided at her first husband's funeral, and performed her marriage ceremony to Mr. Callahan yesterday. I've watched this family through joy and sorrow, prosperity and poverty. And I'm telling you now, under oath if necessary, that these children are blessed to have Kelly Callahan as their mother. Any investigation that suggests otherwise is not seeking truth, it's seeking revenge. Judge Henderson turned to Morrison with raised eyebrows. Deputy, do you have any actual evidence of neglect or abuse? Anything beyond gossip and speculation? Morrison's jaw worked furiously. The speed of the courtship suggests nothing except that two adults made a decision about their own lives, Henderson interrupted. Love doesn't follow a schedule, Deputy. Sometimes it takes years to develop. Sometimes it happens in a moment. The law doesn't prescribe a minimum courtship period. Is there anything else? The children could have better opportunities if they were placed with more prosperous families. The children have two parents who love them and can provide for them, Henderson said sharply. Mr. Callahan is one of the wealthiest men in the territory. These children will want for nothing materially, and more importantly, they'll have their mother who loves them and has proven her dedication to them time and again. Unless you have evidence of actual harm or danger, this investigation is concluded. Morrison looked to Frank Miller, still waiting at the property line, but found no support there. Miller had the sense to see he'd lost this battle. Finally, Morrison pulled himself up and tried to salvage some dignity. I'll be filing a full report with Sheriff Watson. If anything changes, if any evidence of impropriety or neglect comes to light, then you'll be welcome to return with proper cause, Judge Henderson said. Until then, you're done here. Good day, Deputy. Morrison mounted his horse stiffly and rode off without another word, Miller and his companions following. The tension that had gripped the yard for the past hour finally broke, and Kelly sagged against Bo, all her strength suddenly depleted now that the threat had passed. Thank you, she whispered to the assembled townspeople. All of you. Thank you for standing up for us. Martha Henderson came forward and embraced Kelly warmly. You've got more friends than you realize, dear. We just needed to remember what really matters. Not gossip, but truth. Not appearance, but character. I'm sorry we let the ugliness of a few poison our thinking, Tom Pritchard added. Mrs. Callahan, both of you, you're good people. Anyone with eyes should have seen that from the start. The gathering gradually dispersed, each person offering their own apologies or words of support before departing. By the time the last horse disappeared over the rise, Kelly was openly crying, tears of relief, exhaustion, and gratitude all mixed together. It's over, Bo said, holding her close. It's really over. Is it, though? Kelly pulled back to look at him. What if Morrison does find some technicality? What if... Then we'll fight it, Judge Henderson said. He'd stayed behind while the others left, along with his wife Martha and Reverend Clayton. But I don't think you'll have trouble from Morrison again. Not after today. He knows he was pursuing a vendetta rather than justice, and he knows I know it. He won't risk his position by pushing this further. Judge Henderson, Bo said, I can't thank you enough for coming out here, for speaking up for Kelly and the children. Thank Martha, Henderson said with a smile. She's the one who came and fetched me, told me the whole story, and insisted I get involved. When Martha insists on something, I've learned over 40 years of marriage that it's easier to just comply. Martha swatted her husband's arm affectionately. What I told him was the truth, that Kelly Callahan is one of the strongest women I've ever met, and that small-minded people were trying to destroy her for having the audacity to survive and find happiness. I wasn't about to stand by and let that happen. Kelly embraced Martha again, too overcome with emotion to speak. Bo shook Judge Henderson's hand and found the older man studying him with keen eyes. Take care of her, Mr. Callahan, and those children. They've been through enough hardship to last a lifetime. I will, Bo promised. I'll spend every day of the rest of my life making sure they're safe and happy and loved. I believe you, Henderson said. And for what it's worth, I think you found yourself a remarkable wife. Don't take that for granted. Never, Bo said fervently. After the Hendersons and Reverend Clayton departed, Bo and Kelly finally had a moment alone. or as alone as they could be with 5 children in the house. They sat together on the porch steps, exhausted but relieved, watching the afternoon sun paint the wheat field in shades of gold. "I can't believe it's over," Kelly said quietly. "I keep waiting for the next catastrophe, the next crisis." "Maybe there won't be one," Bo suggested. "Maybe we get to just live now, build our life together without constantly fighting for survival." Kelly leaned her head on his shoulder. "That sounds almost too good to be true." "Then maybe we should make it true anyway," Bo said. "Starting with finishing that wheat harvest. The sooner we get it done, the sooner we can move to the ranch and start our new life properly." The next day, they returned to the harvest with renewed purpose. Bo cut wheat while Kelly bundled and shocked it, the physical labor a welcome relief after the emotional intensity of the previous days. The children helped in small ways, Thomas bringing water, Sarah watching the younger ones, even the twins collecting dropped grain heads for the chickens. By evening, the entire field had been cut and shocked, standing in neat rows to dry before threshing. Bo straightened up, his back aching but his heart full, and looked at what they'd accomplished together. "We did it," Kelly said, standing beside him and surveying their work. "We actually did it." "You doubted we would?" "Maybe a little," Kelly admitted. "Everything's happened so fast, Bo. Sometimes I worry I'll wake up and find this was all a dream. That you're not really here, that we're not really married, that I'm still alone trying to figure out how to harvest this wheat by myself." Bo pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not a dream. I'm here, we're married, and you're never going to be alone again. That's a promise." The wheat dried for 3 days, during which Bo divided his time between Kelly's farm and his ranch, making arrangements for the family's move. Jack supervised the preparation of rooms for the children. The ranch house had 8 bedrooms, most of which had stood empty for years, and all of which needed to be cleaned and furnished for young occupants. "Boss is turning the bachelor palace into a family home," Bo overheard one of the ranch hands say, and the words filled him with unexpected pride. Yes, that's exactly what he was doing. The big empty house he'd built for Catherine, that had stood as a monument to his wealth and isolation for 7 years, was about to be filled with life and laughter and love. It felt like redemption. On the 4th day, they threshed the wheat using equipment borrowed from Tom Pritchard, who insisted he owed Kelly a favor for standing up to the gossips. The final tally was even better than Kelly had projected, 560 bushels of premium wheat, worth just over $450 at current market prices. Kelly stood at the grain elevator watching Pritchard write out the bank draft, tears streaming down her face. "I did it. I actually did it. I saved the farm." "You did more than that," Bo said softly. "You proved to everyone, including yourself, that you're stronger than any circumstance life can throw at you." Kelly folded the bank draft carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Then she turned to Bo with a mischievous smile. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" "I don't owe you anything anymore. I paid the debt in full, half in wheat money, half in marriage." Her eyes sparkled. "You came here to collect $800, and you're going home with a wife and 5 children instead. Some might call that a poor business decision, Mr. Callahan." Bo laughed and pulled her into his arms right there in front of Pritchard and half the town. "Some might call it the best decision I ever made, Mrs. Callahan." The move to the Callahan Ranch happened over the course of a week. Bo hired a wagon to transport Kelly's meager belongings, furniture, clothes, kitchen items, and all the small treasures a family accumulates even in poverty. The children were beside themselves with excitement, running from room to room in the big house, marveling at the space and luxury they'd never experienced before. "Papa," Thomas called from upstairs. "Sarah and me have our own rooms. Our own rooms. We don't have to share." "That's wonderful, son," Bo called back, grinning at Kelly. "Told you they'd adjust quickly." But it was Martha who brought the reality of the change home. The little girl stood in the parlor, a room bigger than her entire previous house, clutching her one-armed corn-husk doll, her face showing wonder and uncertainty in equal measure. "Mama?" she said quietly. "Are we really going to live here? Forever?" Kelly knelt down and pulled her daughter close. "Yes, sweet pea. This is our home now." "But it's so big. What if I get lost?" "Then Papa or I will find you," Kelly promised.
We're a family now, Martha. Families stick together and take care of each other. You're never going to be lost or alone or scared again. I promise. Martha considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but can I still keep my old doll, even though we're fancy now? Kelly's laugh was half-sob. You can keep your doll forever, baby. Being fancy doesn't mean forgetting where we came from or what matters. That evening, they gathered for their first family dinner in the ranch house, all 7 of them around the big dining table that had once seated only Bo or sat empty entirely. Cookie, the ranch cook, had outdone himself preparing a feast. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and apple pie for dessert. The children ate with the enthusiastic appetite of youth, chattering about their new rooms, the horses in the barn, all the space to run and play. Bo watched them, marveling at how quickly they'd made themselves at home, how naturally they'd accepted him as their father. After dinner, Kelly put the younger children to bed while Bo read to Thomas from a book of frontier adventures. When he finished, Thomas looked up at him with serious eyes. Papa, can I ask you something? Anything, son. Do you miss your old life? Before us, I mean. When it was just you and everything was quiet and you didn't have kids making noise all the time? Bo set the book aside and pulled Thomas onto his lap, something he'd never imagined doing with any child, let alone one who'd become his in such an unconventional way. You want to know the truth, Thomas? My old life was so quiet it was almost silent. I was so alone I couldn't even hear myself think. And I was miserable. I just didn't realize it because I'd gotten used to being miserable. And now? Now it's noisy and chaotic, and I'm constantly tripping over toys or wiping someone's nose or answering questions I don't know the answers to. Bo smiled, and I've never been happier in my entire life. Thomas hugged him fiercely. I'm glad you married Mama. I'm glad you're our papa now. Me too, son. Me too. After tucking Thomas in, Bo found Kelly in the bedroom they now shared, the master bedroom he'd had built for Catherine but never shared with anyone. Kelly stood by the window looking out at the prairie stretching endlessly under the stars. Penny for your thoughts, Bo said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. I'm thinking about how strange life is, Kelly said softly. 2 weeks ago, I was terrified you were going to take everything from me. Now you've given me everything I ever wanted and things I didn't even know to dream about. 2 weeks ago, I was a rich man who owned everything and had nothing, Bo countered. Now I'm a rich man who has everything that matters. Funny how things work out. Kelly turned in his arms to face him. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your peace and quiet and independence? Every day, Bo said, then laughed at her shocked expression. I'm kidding. Kelly, I don't regret a single moment. Not the debt that brought me here, not the decision to stay, not the chaos of 5 children or the gossip or any of it. You and the kids. You've given me a reason to be more than just wealthy. You've given me a reason to be good. You were already good, Kelly insisted. You just forgot for a while. Maybe. But you reminded me. You reminded me what it means to be brave, to fight for what matters, to choose love over safety. Bo cupped her face in his hands. I love you, Kelly Callahan. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. I love you too, Kelly whispered. Even though you're stubborn and bossy and you think you always know best. I do always know best, Bo said with mock seriousness. See? Impossible, man. But Kelly was smiling as she kissed him, and Bo thought if this was impossible, he never wanted anything possible again. The weeks turned to months, and the Callahan family settled into their new life with surprising ease. The children thrived. Sarah bloomed under Miss Warren's teaching. Thomas discovered a love for horses and spent every free moment in the barn. The twins became the terror of the ranch hands with their mischief and charm, and baby James grew fat and happy under the care of 2 doting parents and 4 protective older siblings. Kelly took to being the lady of the ranch like she'd been born to it, though she never lost her habit of hard work or her fierce independence. She transformed the big cold house into a warm home, filling it with laughter and love, and the kind of casual chaos that comes from 5 children and 2 adults who adore each other. The townspeople eventually came around, though it took time. The Callahans didn't attend church in Dry Creek, too many ugly memories.
but instead made the longer trip to a church in Laramie where they were welcomed without judgment or gossip. Slowly, through their actions and the obvious happiness of their family, they won over even the skeptics. Frank Miller left the territory entirely after Judge Henderson quietly suggested he'd be happier elsewhere. Deputy Morrison kept his position, but never troubled the Callahans again. The old Bishop farm was eventually sold to a young couple just starting out, and Bo took satisfaction in knowing the land that had brought him and Kelly together would help another family build their dreams. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Bo found himself constantly amazed by the life he was living. He'd wake up to children's voices instead of silence, come home to a house full of warmth instead of emptiness, go to bed beside a woman who loved him for who he was rather than what he had. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the prairie, Bo and Kelly stood on the porch watching the children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching the twins how to throw snowballs, while Sarah held baby James bundled against the cold, pointing out the snowflakes to him. "Happy?" Bo asked, pulling Kelly close against the chill. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Kelly said. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I get to have this, all of this." "Believe it," Bo said firmly. "This is real. This is ours. This is forever." Kelly looked up at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside the house.
Do you remember what you said that first day, when you came to collect the debt? I said a lot of things that first day. Most of them wrong. You said a debt's a debt, Kelly reminded him. You said Samuel borrowed knowing what he was signing. I was wrong about that too, Bo said. The real debt wasn't what Samuel owed me. The real debt was what I owed myself. The debt of 7 wasted years, of a life half-lived, of walls built so high I couldn't see the sky anymore. And have you paid that debt? Kelly asked softly. Bo looked at his children playing in the snow, at the lamplight glowing warm in every window of the house, at the woman in his arms who'd somehow seen past his hardness to the man he'd buried underneath. He thought about cornbread disasters and thunderstorms, about transplanted roses and harvested wheat, about the journey from collector to husband, from alone to beloved. Every day, Bo said, I pay it every day by being the man you see when you look at me, by being the father those children deserve, by choosing this, he gestured to the scene before them, over the empty safety I had before. That's very poetic for a cattle rancher, Kelly teased. I learned from the best, Bo countered, then kissed her as the snow fell soft around them and their children's laughter rang out across the prairie like music. Years later, when people asked Bo Callahan about his success, about how he'd built one of the largest ranches in Wyoming territory, raised 5 children who'd all grown into fine adults, maintained a marriage that was the envy of everyone who witnessed it, he always gave the same answer. I came to collect a debt, he'd say, his weathered face creasing in a smile, and found out I was the one in debt all along. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to a barefoot widow who refused to surrender, 5 children who taught me what love really means, and 7 days that changed my entire life.
And Kelly, listening from wherever she happened to be, usually with a grandchild on her lap because their 5 children had given them 12 grandchildren and counting, would smile and add, he came for land, he left with a home, best debt collection in the history of the Wyoming territory. They'd laugh together, the kind of laugh that comes from decades of shared joy and survived hardship, and their children and grandchildren would roll their eyes affectionately because they'd heard the story 100 times but never tired of it. Because it was more than a story. It was a testament to the power of second chances, the courage to be vulnerable again after being hurt, the wisdom to know that real wealth is measured not in acres or cattle, but in the people who love you and the legacy you leave behind. Bo Callahan had ridden into Dry Creek Valley to collect 800. He'd left with something infinitely more valuable, a family, a purpose, and a love that would last not just his lifetime, but echo through generations yet to come. In the end, the debt was paid in full. Not with money, but with something far more precious. 2 wounded hearts that learned to trust again, 5 children who found the father they needed, and a love story that proved it's never too late to start over, never too late to be brave, never too late to come home. The ranch still stands today, passed down through the Callahan family for 5 generations. And if you visit on a quiet evening, when the wind whispers through the prairie grass and the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, you might still hear echoes of children's laughter, the soft murmur of a couple in love, and the sound of a family that almost wasn't, but became something beautiful and lasting and true. All because a rich rancher came to collect a debt and found something worth far more than money. He found grace, redemption, and a love that changed everything. The end.